Hey guys, welcome to the channel. As you see in the thumbnail, what if broken Issei saved by Ophis and become new great red? Before I start, please do support for more awesome content, and subscribe my channel and like this video. Go support and follow the Dustinsage for writing that awesome fanfic, and also make sure to comment on this story. Link in the description. Issei Hayadu is a young man of average height, with spiky brown hair and matching brown eyes. His build was nothing extraordinary, but his heart had always been larger than life. He wore his usual bright smile as he walked through Ko Academy's hallways, his destination set the occult research clubroom, where his friends were waiting. Today was just another normal day in his life as a devil. He had amazing parents who loved and supported him, an exciting life filled with adventure, and most importantly, friends he could always count on. Despite everything, he was happy. Why wouldn't he be? The clubroom door creaked open as he stepped inside, instantly greeted by familiar faces. Issei. Hello everyone, he said cheerfully, waving. Issei. Asia was the first to react, her face lighting up as she hurried over to him. Asia, good afternoon. How was your day? Kiba, yo, partner, Kiba greeted with his usual gentlemanly charm, offering a nod. Kaneko, you're late, pervert, Kaneko muttered, though there was no real malice in her tone. Issei, ahaha, sorry about that. Issei scratched the back of his head, sheepish. Akino, well, Akino chuckled, covering her mouth with her hand. Akino, nice of you to finally join us, Issei-kun. Rosweiss, I hope you weren't up to anything indecent, Rosweiss added, sighing. Rosweiss, honestly, with you, I wouldn't be surprised. Zenobia. Issei, you should be more punctual, Zenobia said in a serious tone. Zenobia, a warrior must always be prepared. Issei, geez, I just walked in and I'm already getting scolded, Issei grumbled. Issei, can a guy catch a break? A soft chuckle caught his attention. As expected, standing beside Akino, like always, was Rias Gremory. She was smiling at him, but there was something different in her expression today, something almost hesitant. Hey Issei, she called gently. Issei, yeah, what's up, Bucho? He responded immediately, standing at attention. Rias, I want to ask you something, she said, her voice warm, but her eyes held an emotion he couldn't quite decipher. Issei, sure, anything, Bucho, he answered without hesitation. How do you see me? There was a stillness in the room. The atmosphere shifted ever so slightly, and Issei blinked, taken aback. Issei, what do you mean? He asked cautiously. Rias, seriously, Issei, how do you see me? Rias repeated, this time firmer. Rias, after everything we've been through, after all we've fought for, after all the moments we've shared, how do you truly see me? Issei felt a lump form in his throat as he realized what she was asking. He understood now. His mind raced, memories flooding back. The moment she saved his life, turning him into a devil to keep him from dying. The battles they fought together, Iser, Kokabeel, the White Dragon Emperor, Loki, Diodora. The bond they had built over time, the trust, the friendship. But then, Rainier. The name sent a shiver down his spine. His breath hitched. He had given Rainier his heart. He had been willing to stop being a pervert, to dedicate himself to one girl, to love her fully. He had been ready to give her everything, his dreams, his devotion, his entire soul. And what did he get in return? A hole in his chest. A cold, cruel smile. Mockery, laughter. He had been discarded like trash. Even though the physical wound had long since healed, the emotional scars had never truly faded. Could he ever allow himself to feel that kind of love again? Could he trust someone with his heart, knowing the risk of being shattered once more? Would Rias do the same thing to him? Would she use him and throw him away like Rainier had? Would she break him beyond repair? The thought terrified him. Silence stretched between them. Finally, Issei sighed and looked her straight in the eyes. His tone was firm, his resolve unshaken. Issei, I see you as a great friend, Bucho. A great president. And I can't thank you enough for everything you've done for me, he said in a resolute voice. The silence in the room grew deafening. Rias looked as though she had been struck. Her blue eyes widened in shock, her breath hitched, and for a brief moment she seemed frozen. Then, in a trembling voice, she spoke. Rias, how could you? She whispered. Issei frowned. Bucho? Rias, how could you say that, Issei? She suddenly demanded, her voice rising. Rias, after everything we've been through? After all we fought for? I actually loved you, Issei. I actually had feelings for you. Tears welled in her eyes. Issei felt his heart clench. Akino, Issei, you're a terrible person, Akino added coldly. Asia looked devastated. Asia, Issei-san, I don't understand, how could you say that to Rias Onishima? Kiba remained silent, though his eyes showed disappointment. You idiot, Kaneko muttered, shaking her head. Zenobia crossed her arms. Zenobia, I thought you were stronger than this, Issei. Rosweiss looked away, sighing. Rosweiss, I expected better from you. Issei felt his entire body freeze. He opened his mouth to speak, to explain, but then, Rias, I hate you, Issei Hayato. Rias' words cut through the air like a blade. Issei's blood ran cold. A deafening silence followed. Rias' eyes widened in horror as she realized what she had just said. She immediately covered her mouth, but the damage was done. Issei stood there, utterly frozen. For a moment, nothing else existed. Just those words. I wish I could have left you for dead. I don't blame Rainier for what she did. A slow, hollow chuckle escaped his. His head lowered, his shoulders trembled. Then he looked up at her, and for the first time, Rias saw something in his eyes that she had never seen before. Cold. Empty. Issei, do you know how it felt, right? He began, his voice eerily calm. Issei, to give your heart to someone? To be happy? To actually be in love? His words were quiet, but they echoed in the tense air. Issei, have you ever felt a hole in your chest, Bucho? Have you ever laid on the ground, dying slowly? Have you ever felt your organs shutting down, your breath growing weaker, knowing that the person you loved did that to you? The room was silent. No one dared to speak. Issei, you don't know that pain, Rias. You'll never know, he continued, his voice growing rawer with emotion. Issei, because you've always been treated like a princess. Spoiled. Loved. Cherished. Bitch. His fingers curled into fists. Issei, I was depressed, Rias. She flinched. Issei, you think depression is just being sad? Just being in a bad mood? No. It's falling into a state of grayness and numbness. It's waking up and feeling nothing. It's walking through life with a hole in your chest, pretending to be okay because no one cares. He exhaled shakily. Issei, but I bottled it up. I smiled through it. And now, here we are. You made me remember it. You made me feel it all over again. Rias looked shattered. Tears streamed down her face. They all showed sympathy. The weight of their words, the realization of what they had done, pressed down on them like a suffocating force. Rias stepped forward, her hands trembling, her heart pounding painfully in her chest. Rias, Issei, I'm sorry. Please forgive me, she pleaded, her voice barely above a whisper, but filled with desperate sincerity. Issei stared at her, his expression unreadable, his gaze cold and distant. Issei, you're no different from her. You're the same. I'm a fool for thinking you were different. The same with the rest of you, he said, his voice steady yet laced with a bitterness that made Rias flinch. Issei, I hate you, Rias Gremory. I hate you so much. Same with all of you. You heard me right. I finally said your name. Isn't that what you've always wanted? His words struck her like a blade, sharp and merciless. Rias felt her breath itch, her throat tightening as tears threatened to fall. Rias, Issei, please, I take it back. I never meant what I said. Please, Issei, don't you feel anything? Issei, I don't feel sad. I don't feel angry. I feel nothing, he responded, his voice devoid of the warmth they had always known. Issei, the biggest mistake I ever made was thinking you'd be different from her. He grabbed his bag and turned to leave. Asia, we can talk about this. Asia's voice broke through the tense silence, desperation evident in her tone. Asia, please, Issei, don't go like this. Akino took a step forward, her usual composed demeanor shattered. Akino, Issei, you can't just leave. We can fix this. Zenobia clenched her fists. Zenobia, we didn't mean to hurt you. You're our comrade. Kaneko, who had always thrown insults his way, now looked at him with wide, shaken eyes. Kaneko, you're my friend. Rosweiss spoke up as well. Rosweiss, Issei, you can't just walk away from us. This isn't right. He didn't stop. They all reached out, but it was too late. Issei slammed the door behind him with enough force to rattle the walls. A heavy silence hung in the room. Irina, what have we done? Irina whispered, her voice barely audible. Rias stood frozen in place, unable to process what had just happened. Issei was gone. And their relationship, it was already beyond repair. Issei walked aimlessly through the streets, his mind a chaotic mess. His hands trembled slightly, though he didn't know whether it was from anger, sadness, or simply exhaustion. He felt hollow. Drake, partner, how are you holding up? Drake's voice rumbled gently in his mind. Issei sighed, his steps slowing. Issei, I'm okay. Is that what you want to hear? He let out a bitter chuckle. Issei, because I'm not. I'm definitely not okay. Drake hesitated before responding. Drake, please, partner. Try your best to heal. Don't let this consume you. It could affect your. Issei, my mental health? Issei scoffed. Issei, Drake, my mental health is already gone. I've finally lost it. Something I never thought was possible. Drake's voice softened. Issei, I've lost my purpose, Drake. I lost it. I don't know anymore. Maybe I should just go home, fall asleep, and try to forget before I fall apart completely. Before he could take another step, a familiar voice called out to him. Azazel, Issei? Aren't you supposed to be at the ORC? He turned to see Azazel standing there, arms crossed, but his usual easygoing expression was nowhere to be found. The older man was studying him carefully, and whatever he saw in Issei's face made his brows furrow. Azazel, why? So I can get hurt again? Issei replied, his tone empty. Azazel frowned. Azazel, what happened? Issei turned his head away. Issei, go ask them. His voice was quiet but firm. Azazel didn't say anything, watching as his student walked past him. There was a heaviness in Issei's steps that hadn't been there before, as if every movement required effort. Azazel wanted to push for answers, but he had a feeling he already knew what had happened. He sighed, deciding to hear the full story from Rias. As Issei continued walking, he noticed Matsuda and Motohama a few feet ahead, their usual grins absent. They looked at him, about to greet him, but the moment they saw his face, they hesitated. The light in his eyes was gone. Before they could say anything, another voice rang out. Hey, pervert! Issei turned slightly, his dull eyes landing on the person who had called him. Murayama. She had always called him that, mocked him for being the pervert of Ko Academy. It was their usual dynamic. But the moment she saw his face, she froze. His expression was wrong. His eyes empty, she swallowed. Issei, are you okay? He let out a small, tired laugh. Issei, no matter what you call me, it doesn't matter. I've already been hurt to the extent that those kinds of things don't work on me anymore. He paused for a moment, then continued, his voice quieter. Issei, to be honest, Murayama, the reason I always peeked at you was because I actually had a crush on you. Murayama's eyes widened in shock. Issei, but you always saw me as a pervert. You never even tried to know the real me. Issei gave a small, sad smile. Issei, so I listened. I became the pervert you always wanted to see in me. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Issei, I just wanted to say I'm sorry. Sorry for being pathetic. Hope you can forgive me. Then he turned away and began to walk again, his steps slower, as if he carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. Murayama stared at him, her hands clenched into fists. Murayama, Issei. Her voice was barely a whisper. Murayama, what happened to you? Was it because of me? But Issei didn't turn back, and for the first time, Murayama felt something she never thought she would: guilt. Azazel wasn't in a good mood at all. He had seen a lot of things in his long life: wars, betrayals, the rise and fall of powerful beings, but nothing quite like this. Issei was, without a doubt, one of the nicest people he had ever met. Sure, the kid had a perverted streak and an obsession with chests and harems, but at his core, he was loyal, selfless, and kind. If you were his friend, he would go to hell and back for you without a second thought. And now, that same kid was walking around looking like a dead man. Azazel's golden eyes swept over the ORC members, his usual smirk nowhere in sight. His expression was cold, serious, and completely unamused. Azazel, what the hell is going on with you guys and Issei? His voice carried an authority that demanded answers, but instead of responding, they all remained silent, their faces downcast. Rias clenched her fists at her sides. The image of Issei's hollow eyes, the way he had looked at her with nothing but cold detachment, flashed in her mind again. It sent a painful ache through her chest. Azazel's patience was wearing thin. His gaze landed on Rosweiss. Azazel, Rosweiss. What happened? She sighed, rubbing her temple. Rosweiss, it's a long story. I have time, Azazel shot back. Azazel, start talking. Rosweiss hesitated before finally speaking. She told him everything. The argument. The things Rias had said to Issei. The way he had completely shut down, his voice void of all the warmth they had once known. The look in his eyes when he finally called Rias by her full name, the absolute finality in his words when he told them he wanted nothing to do with them. She spoke about how he walked away without even looking back, how he slammed the door on them as if to shut them out of his life completely. When she finished, the room was thick with tension. Azazel ran a hand down his face, letting out a slow, frustrated breath. Then, he turned to Rias, and his eyes were filled with pure disappointment. Azazel, Rias, what the hell is wrong with you? His voice was dangerously low, each word filled with restrained anger. Azazel, do you have any idea what you've done to that kid? He shook his head. Azazel, I've seen people break before. Hell, I've even broken a few myself. But I have never seen anyone as broken as Issei. Rias flinched. She knew it. She had seen it in his eyes. But hearing it out loud, hearing it confirmed by someone like Azazel, made it all the more real. Azazel's voice grew harsher. Azazel, why, Rias? After everything he's done for you? After everything he's done for all of you? He gestured to the group. Azazel, do you even realize how much he sacrificed for you people? No one responded. Azazel scoffed, shaking his head. Azazel, let's go down the list, shall we? Issei saved you from Riser. That bastard was about to take you away, and who stood up for you when you couldn't do it yourself? Issei. Who put his life on the line, who gave everything he had to make sure you weren't forced into that marriage. Issei. His golden eyes flicked to Kiba. Azazel, and you. Remember your whole crash-out revenge arc? Who stood beside you? Who helped you find closure, helped you move forward? Issei. He never once judged you for your anger, never once turned away from you, even when you were consumed by revenge. He was there for you. Kiba swallowed hard, guilt heavy in his chest. Azazel turned to Aquino. Aquino, what about you, Aquino? Who helped you reconcile with your father? Who stood by you, even when you wanted nothing to do with Barakiel? Who comforted you when you were too scared to face your past? Aquino didn't say a word, her head bowed, her hands clenched into fists. Kaneko. Azazel's voice snapped toward the small Nikomata. Azazel, who was the one who protected you from Kuroka? Who stood between you and your sister, even when he had no reason to? Who was the one who told you that you weren't a monster, that you deserved happiness? Kaneko bit her lip, her cat ears twitching as she tried to suppress the emotions rising in her chest. And Asia. Azazel's voice softened, but it still held a sharp edge. Azazel, he went berserk when you were taken. He activated Juggernaut Drive, lost years of his lifespan just because of what happened. And now you're all acting like he's disposable? I know! Rias finally shouted, her voice cracking. Rias, I know what he's done for us. I know how much he's given. I know how much I've hurt him. Her breathing was heavy, her eyes glossy with unshed tears. Rias, I just want to make amends. Azazel sneered. Azazel, no. No, no, no. You stay the hell away from him. His words were sharp, final. Azazel, I had to send my familiar to monitor him so he doesn't do anything bad to himself. That's how bad it is, Rias. That's how much you've broken him. Aquino, you can't do that. Aquino snapped, stepping forward. Azazel narrowed his eyes. Azazel, excuse me? Asia, he needs our help. Asia's voice was filled with determination. Asia, we need to be there for him. You can't just tell us to stay away from him. Azazel's jaw clenched, and for a second, he felt like giving them a good wake-up call. It has been long since he last BITCHSLAPPD. This time it won't be kinky. But instead, he let out a bitter chuckle. Azazel, and that, he said coldly, Azazel, is exactly why you people are part of the problem. Asia stiffened. What? Azazel, you all think this is about you helping him, Azazel said. Azazel, you think that if you just run back into his life and say you're sorry, he'll just magically be okay? Newsflash, he doesn't want your help. He doesn't want to see you. And forcing your presence on him when he's already at his breaking point will only make things worse. Asia, I just don't want to abandon him, Asia whispered. Azazel exhaled through his nose, calming himself. Azazel, I get it, Asia. I do. But sometimes, stepping away is the only way to actually help someone. You all made him feel like nothing. Right now, he needs time to figure out who he is without you. Kiba, I'm afraid he's right. Kiba spoke up, his voice solemn. Rias turned to him, eyes desperate. Kiba? Kiba sighed. Kiba, Issei is very hurt. I'm afraid if we get too close to him now, his condition may worsen. I think it's best we leave him alone for now. Azazel gave a nod of approval. Azazel, at least one of you has brain cells, but Zenobia started. Azazel, no buts. Azazel cut her off. He took a step forward, his golden eyes scanning each and every one of them. Then, in a quieter, more serious voice, he asked, Azazel, I have a question for all of you. Someone who has too much love to give, what happens when that love turns into hate and indifference? No one had an answer, and that silence told Azazel everything he needed to know. Would you die for me? Issei lay on the cold ground, his body numb, a gaping hole in his stomach oozing blood. He barely registered the pain. His mind was drowning in a maelstrom of anguish, his emotions in complete turmoil. Issei, not again, please stop. His voice was a mere whisper, his body trembling as he tried to move, but his limbs felt heavy, unresponsive. Issei, this is just a dream, he told himself desperately. Issei, she's dead. She can't be real. But then, the giggle. That familiar, sickeningly sweet giggle. Rainier, such an idiot. Rainier's voice was laced with mockery, her cruel smirk piercing straight through his heart. Rainier, you really think I ever felt anything for you, Issei? You're just a fool, a toy, an easy mark whose libido is bigger than his IQ. So easy to exploit. Issei's breathing hitched. His fingers dug into the dirt beneath him. Issei, I had feelings for you, I was willing to give you my heart. Why? Why did you hurt me like this? His voice cracked, his vision blurred. Rainier, because it's fun, silly. She giggled again, the sound like nails on a chalkboard. Rainier, it's fun to watch you be happy, to let you think you finally found love, only for it all to shatter before your very eyes. It's your destiny, Issei, first with me, and now with Rias. His breath caught in his throat. A new presence emerged from the shadows. Rias. She stepped forward, her crimson hair glowing under an eerie light, her blue eyes cold and empty. And then she smiled, a sadistic, mocking smile. Rias, Issei, you are so gullible. Breaking you is so easy, she sneered. Rias, did you really think I needed you? That I loved you? Her laugh was filled with venom. Rias, it was never about you, you fool. It was your sacred gear I wanted. Without the boosted gear, you're nothing. You're not even worth the dirt on my shoes. They both laughed now, their voices echoing in his head, growing louder, suffocating him. The world began to darken, swirling into a void of despair. With a sharp intake of breath, Issei jolted awake. His body was drenched in sweat, his heart hammering against his ribs. His breath came in ragged gasps. Issei, no, not anymore, I won't fall for it again. His voice cracked as he shouted into the darkness. Drake, Issei, what happened to you? Drake's voice rumbled in his mind, filled with concern. Issei let out a shaky breath. Issei, a nightmare, I guess. Drake sighed deeply. Drake, Issei, you need help. Issei, I don't need anyone, Issei muttered, rubbing his temples. Issei, I'll do it myself. Drake's tone hardened. Drake, Issei, enough. A long silence stretched between them before Issei finally relented. Fine, he grumbled. Dragging himself out of bed, he walked upstairs, hoping to avoid any unwanted encounters. But the moment he entered the living room, his parents were there. Issei, hey mom. Hey dad. He greeted them with a forced smile, the same fake mask he'd worn for years. His father's expression was stone cold, his arms crossed. Dad, Issei, I'm very disappointed in you. The fake smile on Issei's face twitched. Issei, what is it now? He sighed. Mom, she really loved you, Issei. Why would you break her heart like that? His mother's voice was laced with disapproval. Issei clenched his fists so tightly his nails dug into his palms. Well, Issei, shut the up. Issei cut him off, his voice a mix of anger and heartbreak. Issei, I don't know what lies she's been telling you, but I don't want to hear it. His parents stared at him in shock, as if they'd never seen him this way before. Issei, after Yuma, I was broken. Issei continued, his voice trembling. Issei, did you even notice? Did you see your son suffering? No. You ignored it. You let me suffer alone. And now it's happening again, and you, his voice cracked. Issei, and now you blame me? What kind of parents are you? Dad, Issei, watch your tone, his father said sharply. Issei let out a bitter laugh, his vision blurry with unshed tears. Issei, it seems you guys aren't really my parents. His voice wavered. His mother took a step forward, concern flickering across her face. Mom, Issei, what are you saying? He let out a shaky breath. Issei, parents are supposed to help their children when they need it. But you too? You've never helped me. You always take their side. Instead of supporting me, you just reinforce my problems. He swallowed the lump in his throat. Issei, I don't think I can see you both as my parents anymore. His father scoffed. Dad, then you can leave. Issei wasn't surprised. His mother's face paled. Mom, wait. Let's think this through, she pleaded, but Issei had already turned away. He walked to his room, grabbed a suitcase, and stuffed it with clothes. When he returned to the living room, his mother looked at him with tears in her eyes. Issei, wait. He didn't stop. Dad, he'll be back. Don't worry, his father muttered dismissively. Issei slammed the door behind him, stepping out into the cold night. His mind was blank. He walked and walked, not knowing where he was going, not caring. His feet moved on their own, his body on autopilot. After what felt like hours, he finally stopped. A fountain. The same fountain where he had died, not far from where Yuma had betrayed him. When did I get here? Did I space out? Drake, you've just been walking this whole time, Drake murmured. Issei stared at the fountain, his hands trembling. A bitter laugh escaped his. I really am alone, aren't I? Issei gazed at his surroundings, his fingers curling into fists, as he realized where he stood. The place where his life had ended. The place where he had been tricked, used, and discarded like trash. The fountain where Yuma had revealed her true colors before driving a spear of light through his chest. His scowl deepened. The thought of what followed filled him with disgust. Being revived by Rias, bound to serve her like some obedient little dog. That red-headed slut had pretended to care, pretended to be his savior, all while using him as nothing more than a tool. A pawn for her selfish desires. A breeding stock for her clan. Disgusting, he muttered under his breath, his nails digging into his palms. Issei. Long time no see. A voice that he knew all too well. He turned his head, his eyes narrowing as he laid eyes on the one person he had absolutely no interest in seeing. Vali Lucifer. The White Dragon Emperor stood before him, his signature smirk in place, his silver hair illuminated by the dim streetlights. His arms were crossed, his stance relaxed, but the condescension in his gaze was impossible to ignore. So, Vali continued, his voice dripping with mockery. Vali, because of a broken heart, you've fallen into depression? You really do find new ways to disappoint me, Issei. His smirk widened. Vali, and you dare call yourself a Red Dragon Emperor? Issei stared at him for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he spoke. How's your mom? Vali blinked, caught off guard. What? Issei, I mean, how's your mom? Issei repeated, his tone casual. Issei, you know, the one who abandoned you? His curled into a cruel smirk. Issei, the one who left you behind like trash, got remarried, and had children she could actually love? Children who wouldn't make her feel like a monster for giving birth to the Antichrist? Vali's entire body tensed. His fingers twitched. Issei wasn't done. Tell me, Vali, he continued, his voice laced with venom. Issei, how does it feel? Knowing the woman who brought you into this world wanted absolutely nothing to do with you. That she felt nothing but regret when she looked at you. That when she finally had a family, she made sure you weren't a part of it? Vali's smirk was gone. His entire demeanor shifted. His teeth clenched, his hands shaking. Shut up, he hissed. Issei tilted his head. Issei, hit a nerve? Damn, I thought you were all about power, Vali. I didn't realize mommy issues were your real weakness. You, Issei, do you think she even remembers you? Issei mused, his tone mocking. Issei, or do you think she's too busy loving the children she actually wanted? Drake sighed. Drake, who let bro cook? Issei let out a fake gasp. Issei, oh, I get it. You probably tell yourself she was protecting you, right? That's how you cope, huh? Convince yourself that she left for your own good? That she actually gave, eh? He scoffed. Issei, what a joke. You're nothing to her, Vali. Just a mistake she erased from her life. Vali's hands clenched so tightly his nails dug into his palms, drawing blood. His eyes burned with fury, his body trembling with rage. Vali, how dare you? His voice was dangerously low, seething with rage. Vali, I swear on Diddy's name, you'll pay with your life. A wave of killing intent exploded from him, suffocating the air around them. His aura flared, crackling with pure, unfiltered wrath. White dragon balance breaker. Blinding light engulfed Vali as his armor formed around him, his overwhelming energy shaking the very ground beneath them. His eyes glowed with unrelenting fury. Issei remained still, unfazed. His expression darkened, his own power slowly rising. Issei, Welsh Dragon Balance Breaker, Vali/Issei, time to end this. The battle was about to begin. Sirzechs gritted his teeth, his aura flaring in frustration. Sirzechs, damn it, Rias! He couldn't believe it. How could she? After everything Issei had done for her, for all of them, how could she say such cruel things? He had trusted her to care for him, to support him, and instead, she had shattered him beyond repair. Azazel had just finished briefing him on everything that had transpired, and for once, the usually laid-back fallen angel governor was anything but amused. His face, usually filled with humor, was dark with shock, disappointment, and unmistakable anger. Graphia stood beside him, her expression unreadable, but the stiffness in her posture spoke volumes. She was furious. Rias, please. I didn't mean it, Rias pleaded, her voice laced with desperation. Sirzechs shot her a cold glare. Sirzechs, enough. Is what Azazel said incorrect or not? Rias swallowed hard, looking down at her feet. Why, Rias, yes, brother, everything that happened was correct. She hesitated before whispering, Rias, I'm so sorry. Sirzechs sighed heavily, running a hand through his crimson hair. Sirzechs, zip it. I honestly thought you were better than this, Rias. She flinched. Sirzechs, there are no words to describe how disappointed I am, he continued, his voice low and sharp. Sirzechs, you've messed up big time. Graphia, who had remained silent, finally spoke. Graphia, you have no idea what you've done, Rias. Her voice was cold as ice. Graphia, you do not understand the gravity of your actions. Azazel crossed his arms, adding, Azazel, and to make matters worse, I can't even find him at home. Sirzechs swore. Sirzechs, shit. If anything happens to him, Rias, you will be punished. His tone left no room for argument. Then, without warning, a sudden burst of energy rippled through the city, shaking the ground beneath them. The oppressive force sent shivers down their spines. Azazel's eyes narrowed. Azazel, we need to find him before. Wait, you all sense that? Sirzechs paled. His blood ran cold. Sirzechs, that feels like Issei, he whispered. Azazel cursed under his breath. And Vali. Graphia's face turned white. Graphia, oh no. We have to go and help. Sirzechs was already moving, his aura igniting around him. His heart pounded in his chest, fury and desperation mixing in a dangerous storm. I'm coming! But before he could teleport, Azazel grabbed her arm. No, the fallen angel snapped, eyes blazing with irritation. Azazel, you've already done enough, Rias. He turned back to Sirzechs. Azazel, I'll notify Michael. You and Graphia should try to stop them. They might actually kill each other this time. Sirzechs clenched his fists, fighting the urge to lash out in frustration. His magic surged violently, barely contained. Graphia shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. So much anger. Both warriors clashed midair, their fists meeting in a devastating collision that sent shockwaves rippling through the night sky. Sparks of red and blue light danced in the darkness as their fists and kicks connected, the sheer force of their blows creating sonic booms with every strike. The air itself trembled under the weight of their battle, and the very clouds parted from the sheer power radiating from them. Issei roared as he launched a flurry of punches, his boosted gear glowing a deep crimson with power. Boost! 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 His fists moved like a blur, each strike infused with multiplied power, but Vali smirked as his wings flared wide. Divide! 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 The moment Issei's punch was about to land, Vali activated his sacred gear, draining the power from Issei's attacks, weakening the strength behind them. With lightning speed, he ducked under a punch and delivered a brutal counter-strike to Issei's ribs, sending him hurtling back. But Issei recovered midair, twisting his body and blasting forward like a missile, meeting Vali's charge head-on. Their auras clashed, a collision of crimson and azure. Both warriors roared as they struck each other in perfect synchronization. One of Issei's powerful right hooks connected with Vali's jaw, sending his head snapping to the side, while Vali's knee struck Issei's stomach, causing him to cough up saliva from the force of the impact. But Issei didn't let up. His eyes blazed with fury as he surged forward, slamming his knee into Vali's gut before raising his fist high, ready to bring it down with enough force to shatter stone. Vali recovered in a flash, crossing his arms to block, and before Issei could land his next blow, Vali delivered a vicious head but that sent Issei rocketing backward. Issei snarled, shaking off the dizziness. His aura surged around him as he clenched his fists tightly. Dragon shot! A massive beam of crimson energy tore through the air, streaking toward Vala with destructive force. But Vala didn't flinch. His voice rang out calmly. Divide! 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 The incoming blast began to shrink as his sacred gear absorbed the energy. However, his confidence wavered for a split second when he noticed something. There were 5 more dragon shots. His eyes widened as they homed in on him like heat-seeking missiles. Damn it! Vala twisted midair, dodging 3 of them with incredible agility, his body weaving through the deadly barrage like a ghost. But the remaining 2 shots closed in, too fast to avoid. Boom! A massive explosion engulfed him, sending him crashing toward the ground. His armor cracked under the force, steam rising from the impact site as he dug his fingers into the shattered earth to slow his momentum. But even as he knelt in the crater, he smirked. Vala, is that the best you've got? He mocked, shaking off the damage. Issei's eyes burned with determination. Humph! With an earth-shattering stomp, he launched himself forward. Their fists met once again in the heart of the battlefield, a whirlwind of speed and raw power. Every strike sent shockwaves across the land, uprooting trees and cracking the earth beneath them. Vala suddenly ducked under a wild swing, driving his fist into Issei's chin with a brutal uppercut. Before Issei could react, Vala's hand shot down and grabbed his dragon tail. Got you! With a fierce grin, he spun Issei around like a cyclone, his grip unrelenting. The air howled as Issei was swung violently before being smashed into the ground with bone-shattering force. The impact left a deep crater, dust and debris exploding outward from the sheer force. But Vala wasn't finished. His grip tightened around Issei's throat, lifting him into the air as he shot skyward at blinding speed. The wind roared in Issei's ears as they ascended high above the battlefield. Vala smirked darkly. Vala, time to take it down a notch. Then, like a missile, he dove downward, dragging Issei with him. The moment they reached the ground, Vala slammed Issei into the earth with all his might, using his body to break the fall. Boom! The entire battlefield shook. The impact sent a shockwave rippling through the terrain, cracking the earth and uprooting everything in the vicinity. But Vala wasn't done. Before Issei could recover, a powerful kick sent him hurtling backward, smashing through trees like they were paper. His body ricocheted off jagged rocks, each impact sending tremors through his already battered body before he finally collided with the base of a mountain, causing cracks to form along its surface. He groaned, forcing himself up, but then he saw it. Vala hovered above, his hands glowing with blinding white energy. Vala, let's see how you handle this. A barrage of white demonic energy blasts rained down upon him, each one carrying enough power to obliterate an entire army. Issei's eyes widened as the attacks closed in, the sky illuminated by the overwhelming force. Boom! 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 Explosions erupted everywhere. Vala smirked, standing in midair with his wings spread wide, his silver armor gleaming under the moonlight. Is that all you've got, Haida? He taunted, his voice dripping with arrogance. Issei gritted his teeth, his rage boiling over. His crimson armor shimmered with golden energy as he roared, Welsh Sonic Boost Night! With a deafening boom, Issei vanished from sight, moving so fast that even Vala's enhanced senses barely registered him. Before Vala could react, a powerful fist collided with his face, sending him hurtling through the sky like a shooting star. He barely had time to recover before Issei appeared behind him, driving his knee into his back. The impact sent him reeling forward, only for Issei to appear in front of him again, delivering a brutal uppercut that sent him spiraling into the air. Vali barely managed to stabilize himself, but Issei was relentless. He shot forward, a crimson blur, and unleashed a flurry of punches and kicks at breakneck speed. His fists and feet connected over and over, striking Vala before he could even register the attacks. Each impact sent shockwaves through the air, rippling outward with immense force. Vala's armor dented under the barrage, his body screaming in pain as he was knocked around like a ragdoll. Boost! 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 Issei's power surged with each passing second, his movements becoming even faster, his strikes heavier. Vala tried to retaliate, swinging a punch at Issei, but the Red Dragon Emperor sidestepped with ease, his boosted speed making him an untouchable force. A devastating right hook connected with Vala's ribs, followed by a spinning kick that sent him crashing into the ground below. Dust and debris exploded into the air as Vala's body dug a crater into the earth. But Issei wasn't done. With a flicker, He appeared above Vali and shot downward like a meteor, his fist cocked back. Dragonic impact! Vali barely rolled out of the way as Issei's punch obliterated the ground, sending shockwaves for miles. Rocks and dirt shot into the sky as a massive crater formed where Vali had been moments before. Albion's voice echoed in Vali's mind. Albion, if you continue to take more of this, you will lose. Vali spat blood and huffed, trying to ignore the pain wrecking his body. Damn it, I know! Gritting his teeth, Vali shot into the air, but Issei was already on him. The moment Vali stabilized, Issei reappeared in front of him, his fists a crimson blur. The sheer volume of punches overwhelmed Vali, each strike hammering into his body relentlessly. His arms grew numb from blocking, and his breathing became ragged. Boost! 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 The relentless assault continued. Even though Issei's individual strikes weren't the strongest, their sheer frequency was wearing Vali down rapidly. He felt his vision blur, his reactions slowing ever so slightly. Vali clenched his fists. Vali, he's too fast. My dividing can't keep up. Albion's voice rang in his mind again. Albion, use half dimension to shrink the battlefield. Limit his movement. Vali's curled into a smirk. Good idea. With a mighty flap of his wings, he shot into the sky. Issei narrowed his eyes. Issei, where do you think you're going? I'm not done venting yet, Vali snorted. Vali humph, vent on this. Half dimension. The air trembled as space itself distorted. The battlefield shrank rapidly, the sky folding inward, the land compressing. Issei's movements suddenly felt more constrained, the open sky now much smaller, making it harder to maneuver at top speed. What the hell is he up to? Issei thought. Drake's voice rang in his mind. Drake, be careful, partner. There's a reason for this tactic. But Issei ignored the warning. He shot forward again, his fists burning with golden energy. He continued his brutal assault, striking at Vali with everything he had. Vali dodged upwards, forcing Issei to pursue him. Divide! 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 Issei suddenly felt his strength draining, his body feeling heavier. His power was being cut in half repeatedly, his momentum faltered. Shit! Vali capitalized immediately. He blurred forward, his fist surging with crackling demonic energy. Demonic fist, shattered void, a massive force smashed into Issei before he could react. He felt his ribs crack, his breath stolen from him. His body shot downward at terrifying speed, crashing through layers of rock and soil before slamming into the ground with an earth-shattering explosion. A deep silence followed. The dust settled, revealing Issei sprawled on the ground, his armor shattered in places, blood trickling from his mouth. His entire body screamed in agony. Vali descended slowly, his gaze cool. Vali, I have to admit your power has grown. Your strength has increased a lot since our last fight. But unfortunately for you, I developed this technique specifically for you. And I didn't even need to use the completed version. Issei groaned inwardly. Issei, if that wasn't the complete version, then what would have happened if it was? Drake's voice was firm. Drake, partner, our only option is to escape. You've lost too much blood, and it's only getting worse. Issei gritted his teeth. Issei escape? No way in hell. I'm the Red Dragon Emperor. It's either I fight, or I die trying. A crimson glow engulfed him as his form changed. His armor bulked up, gaining large arms and a bulky figure. Welsh Rook Blaster. Issei launched himself at Vali, his movements slower but his power immense. He swung a devastating fist. Vali blocked, but the sheer force sent shockwaves through his arms. Issei grabbed his wrist and pulled him into a brutal knee strike to the gut, making Vali gasp in pain. Without hesitation, Issei spun and slammed a hammer-like fist into Vali's side, sending him flying into the mountain. He shot after him, crashing into Vali with the force of a warhammer. Vali coughed up blood as the mountain cracked beneath them. Vali retaliated with a demonic blast, but Issei tanked it, pushing forward and driving his fist into Vali's stomach, making his entire body shudder. But Vali wasn't out yet. Summoning his strength, he kicked off the mountain, flipping over Issei and delivering a spinning kick to his head. Issei staggered, and Vali capitalized with a divide to weaken him again. They clashed at full power, exchanging brutal blows. Their fists cracked the air, energy flaring violently with every impact. Each strike was faster than the eye could see, their battle shaking the battlefield itself. Both warriors panted, their bodies pushed to their limits. Blood dripped from their wounds, yet neither backed down. Vali smirked. Vali, this is the fight I wanted. Issei wiped the blood from his lip and grinned. Issei, then let's keep going. Their battle was far from over. Issei unleashed a battle cry, his voice echoing across the battlefield as his fist collided with Vali's chest, sending him hurtling backward like a shooting star. Vali barely managed to bring his arms up in time, absorbing most of the impact, but the sheer force behind the punch still sent him skidding through the air. Gritting his teeth, he steadied himself and retaliated with a vicious right hook aimed at Issei's face. The punch connected, sending a sharp jolt of pain through Issei's skull. But his enhanced defenses absorbed most of the damage, allowing him to shake it off almost instantly. His crimson armor shimmered as he took a step forward, eyes blazing with determination. Boost! 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 The chant reverberated through the air, his power surging exponentially. Boost! 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 His body thrummed with energy, his aura expanding like a raging inferno. Boost! 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 His fist clenched, his entire body crackling with golden electricity. Boost! 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 With an earth-shattering roar, Issei propelled himself forward, his gauntlet glowing with the sheer power of his boosted energy. He cocked his arm back, ready to unleash his ultimate attack. Solid impact. The air itself seemed to split apart as his fist rocketed toward Vali, carrying the full force of his enhanced strength. But Vali was ready. Vali, damn it, you think I'll just let you hit me? His wings flared, his body wreathed in a violent aura of demonic energy. With a roar of his own, he gathered every ounce of power he had into his fist. Demonic fist, shattered void. The moment their attacks collided, the very fabric of space trembled. A cataclysmic explosion erupted between them, distorting reality itself. The shockwave ripped through the battlefield, obliterating everything in a massive radius. The sky twisted, the ground cracked apart, and a deafening roar filled the heavens. Issei gritted his teeth as the force of the impact sent him flying, his armor struggling to hold together. His body ached all over, but he refused to go down. With sheer force of will, he stabilized himself midair, his armor shifting back to its standard balance breaker form. Vali's eyes gleamed as he shot forward, his wings propelling him like a missile. Divide! 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 Issei's power began to wane as Vali continuously halved his strength. Divide! 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 His movements slowed, his once overwhelming force now diminishing rapidly. Divide! 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 Vali seized the opportunity, closing the distance in an instant. His fist crashed into Issei's face with terrifying force, sending him hurtling toward the ground. Divide! 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 Issei crashed into the earth, his body bouncing off the shattered terrain as Vali descended like a vengeful god. He landed atop Issei, driving his knee into his gut. A sharp, painful gasp escaped Issei's. Vali didn't let up. He grabbed Issei by the throat and slammed him into the ground repeatedly, each impact creating deeper craters. Dust and debris filled the air as the relentless assault continued. Yul Vali, Issei Hayadu, is this really all you have? Vali shouted, his voice a mix of exhilaration and frustration. He reared back his fist and sent it crashing into Issei's face. Blood splattered. Another punch. More blood. Another. Issei's mind blurred. His vision swam. His ears rang. His strength was fading. Would you die for me? A cold, familiar voice whispered in his mind. Rainair. A chilling sensation ran down his spine. Another punch to the face. What do you think about me, Issei? Rias. His thoughts twisted. The pain in his body mixed with the echoes of his past. Why am I hearing them? His head throbbed, his consciousness slipping. Vali's fist hammered into him again, sending him rolling across the battlefield. Far away, beyond the chaos of their battle, the world watched. Across the human world, factions of exorcists, magicians, and supernatural beings marveled at the sheer destruction unfolding before them. In the heart of Kyoto, Yasaka and Kunu watched with wide eyes. Kunu whispered. Yasaka shook her head. Yasaka, not at this rate. They're too far gone. Even Odin, watching from Asgard, let out a low whistle. Odin, by the gods, this is one hell of a brawl. Back on the battlefield, Issei coughed, blood splattering onto the broken ground. His vision wavered, but his body refused to stay down. Drake's voice echoed in his mind. Drake, partner, you have nothing left to give. If this keeps up. Shut up, Issei growled, forcing himself up. Vali hovered above him, arms crossed. Vali, you should stay down, Issei. Even you must know when a fight is lost. Issei wiped the blood from his and stared. Issei lost? And not yet. Issei found himself drifting in the vast emptiness of his mindscape, the weight of his battered body sinking into the endless void. He could feel it, his consciousness slipping, his soul on the verge of breaking. The pain from his battle with Vali had pushed him to his limit. Even if he somehow managed to win, his body was too broken to continue. His strength was gone. His will had crumbled. His spirit had nothing left to give. Issei, damn it, I'm dying, he muttered, his voice barely a whisper. Around him, the darkness rippled, and from the depths emerged the familiar figures of those who had come before him, the past wielders of the boosted gear. Belzerd stood at the forefront, his towering form exuding an air of sheer dominance. His piercing gaze bore into Issei with something between disappointment and understanding. Belzerd, you've come so far, Belzerd said, his voice calm yet firm. Belzerd, from a pathetic, weak pervert to one of the strongest Red Dragon Emperors in history. And now you're just going to give up? Elsha crossed her arms beside him, her expression softer but no less determined. Elsha, after everything you've endured, after everything you fought for, you're ready to throw it all away? Issei lowered his head. Issei, what else can I do? I have nothing left. They turned their backs on me. My so-called comrades, my so-called friends, I was just a tool for them. I fought, I bled, I nearly died countless times, and for what? Just to be cast aside like garbage the moment I didn't want be what she wished to mold me into? He clenched his fists, his voice trembling with anger and grief. Issei, what's the point? Even if I keep fighting, even if I survive this, what do I have left? Rias? The others? My parents, they never really cared. They only wanted the power of the Red Dragon Emperor, not me. The mindscape was silent for a moment. Then, a heavy sigh broke through the quiet. Edward, you really are a fool, a deep voice rumbled. Issei turned to see a man with long, flowing silver hair and fierce crimson eyes. One of the most legendary hosts, Edward the Crimson Fang. Edward, do you think you're the only one who's been betrayed? Abandoned? Forgotten? Edward stepped forward, his gaze never leaving Issei's. Edward, every single one of us standing here has experienced despair. We have all faced moments where we thought everything was lost. Do you know why we continued? Why we endured? Issei said nothing, but his silence was enough of an answer. Elsha took a step closer. Elsha, because we refused to let others define us. Because we refused to let them decide our worth. You think you have nothing left? You have power, Issei. You have the will to fight, even if you don't realize it. You have the potential to surpass every single one of us. Belzerd's voice boomed. Belzerd, and yet you're sitting here wallowing in self-pity. Have you truly fallen so low? Issei gritted his teeth. Issei, then what do you expect me to do? I'm broken. My body is destroyed, my mind is exhausted, and even if I wanted to keep fighting, I can't. I have nothing left to give. Silence. Then, slowly, one by one, the past hosts of the boosted gear stepped forward. There were more of them than Issei had ever seen before, warriors, mages, kings, and even assassins. Each one of them bore the mark of the Red Dragon Emperor, their presences radiating power beyond comprehension. We know, Edward said. Edward, which is why we're not letting you die here, at least not in this fight. Issei's eyes widened as he watched them reach into their chests, their hands glowing with raw energy. Issei, what are you doing? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Belzerd smirked. Belzerd, giving you a piece of our power. You're our successor, Issei. And we refuse to let you fall in this fight. One by one, each past host pulled out a fragment of their own essence, a burning ember of their soul, forged from lifetimes of battle. The energy began to swirl around Issei, surrounding him in a vortex of overwhelming strength. Elsha, you carry the legacy of the Red Dragon Emperor, Elsha said, her voice fierce. Elsha, a hat title isn't just about power, it's about survival. It's about rising above despair, even when the world tries to drag you down. Issei's body trembled as the energy seeped into him, his broken form beginning to mend itself. The pain, while still present, became bearable. Strength slowly returned to his limbs, and the exhaustion that had crushed him moments ago was beginning to fade. Edward, you said you have nothing left to give? Edward's voice was like a storm. Edward, then take what we are giving you. Rise up, Issei. Not for them. Not for the ones who betrayed you. But for yourself. Issei's breathing grew heavy as his fingers curled into fists. His heartbeat pounded in his ears, louder than ever before. Belzerd smirked. Belzerd, it's time you reminded the world why you are the Red Dragon Emperor. Issei lay sprawled across the ground, his body utterly brutalized. His once proud frame was now a shattered mess of torn flesh and battered muscle. His armor had long since broken apart, revealing deep gashes across his arms and chest, each wound oozing with blood. His right eye was swollen shut, his split and caked with dried crimson. His ribs felt like they had been crushed under the weight of mountains, and every breath he took was agony. His arms trembled as he barely held himself up, fingers clawing into the broken earth beneath him. Vali hovered above him, his arms crossed, gazing down with an unreadable expression. His own armor bore cracks, proof that Issei had at least managed to damage him, but the difference in their conditions was night and day. Vali, you've finally given up, Vali muttered, his voice carrying no triumph, only finality. Issei's fingers twitched. His breath came ragged and uneven. Yet, as the world around him blurred, his curled into a weak smile. I am the Red Dragon Emperor of this generation, he whispered, the words barely audible at first. Vali frowned. What? Issei's body shook, not from weakness, but from something else entirely. Forged by battle, unaware of happiness nor aware of guilt, Drake stirred within him, the dragon's presence pulsing within his very soul. What stood life to die like the others before me, waiting for man's end? A deep hum resonated from within his gauntlet, the gem flickering with a crimson glow. Fueled by grief and sadness, finally lost to this world, and to never return. The earth trembled. The air grew heavy, and conquer those who stand in my way. Vali took a step back, his eyes narrowing. Albion's voice rumbled in his mind, filled with an unease he rarely expressed. Albion, Vali, something is wrong with the boy. I am neither a hero nor a villain. Issei's eyes snapped open, glowing with an unnatural crimson. His battered frame, once barely able to stand, now exuded an overwhelming aura of raw dominance. I am the Red Dragon Emperor of domination. The gauntlet pulsed, the red gem glowing brighter than ever before. I have no regrets. I chose this path. Drake's voice erupted with a roar that shook the heavens. Boosted gear, sacred evolution. A blinding explosion of power detonated from Issei's form, sending shockwaves that shattered the very landscape. The sky itself seemed to tremble under the sheer force, as a crimson pillar of energy surged into the heavens, illuminating the world in a hellish red light. Mountains cracked, the earth split apart, and even Vali was forced to shield himself from the overwhelming force. When the light finally faded, Issei stood in the center, reborn. His armor had changed. No longer was it the standard balance breaker he had once worn. It was bigger, more draconic, more monstrous. His wings had expanded, lined with crimson energy, resembling the wings of Drake himself. The scales covering his body pulsed with power, sharper and more defined. His claws gleamed like freshly forged steel, and his tail lashed behind him, cracking the very air with its movements. His aura alone made the air feel suffocating. Vali's heart pounded in his chest. Vali, what kind of chant was that? Albion's voice was grave. Albion, a chant like that is tied to the will of the host. This is the first time I've ever heard something like that. The boy, he has changed. The world had taken notice. Far beyond their battlefield, the Greek gods stirred. In Olympus, Zeus sat upon his golden throne, his fingers tapping against the armrest as he stared into the shifting heavens. A deep frown creased his aged face. Zeus, this power, the red dragon, has awakened something beyond its limits. Ares grinned, cracking his knuckles. Ares, now that is a warrior's aura. That boy, I like him. Athena narrowed her eyes, her silver gaze watching the distant battle unfold. Athena, it is not just strength. There is an intent within it, one that does not seek to protect, but to dominate. Hades scoffed, his skeletal fingers tightening around his staff. Hades, a mortal dares to reach such heights? This could become troublesome. Meanwhile, within the celestial realm of the Shinto, Tamamonome sat upon a golden cushion, her foxtails swaying lazily. Her golden eyes flickered as she sensed the overwhelming energy erupting from Issei's transformation. Tamamonome, my, this sensation. She licked her her expression shifting into a mixture of intrigue and amusement. Tamamonome, a human who defies his own limitations? How utterly fascinating. Amaterasu, standing beside her, did not share her amusement. Amaterasu, this is not something to take lightly, Tamamo. That power, it rivals even gods. Susanoo grunted, resting his massive blade against his shoulder. Susanoo, let him come. If he dares to challenge us, I will strike him down myself. In the Hindu pantheon, Shiva sat upon his throne, his many arms resting upon his lap as he watched the events unfold. His deep, blue skin glowed faintly under the cosmic light. He exhaled slowly, his eyes half-lidded yet fully aware. Shiva, so, the red dragon has awakened something new. His voice carried across the divine halls like the whisper of a storm. Interesting. Indra sneered, his arms crossed. Indra, he is nothing but a mortal wielding borrowed power. He should know his place. Vishnu's gaze was calm yet sharp. Vishnu, and yet his presence alone has shaken the realms. This is no ordinary evolution. Back at the battlefield, outside the barrier, Azazel's fists clenched as he stared at the eruption of power. Azazel, this is bad, he muttered. Really bad. Michael, standing beside him, spoke in a measured tone. Michael, when a sacred gear reaches its threshold, it tends to evolve, but this is something else entirely. Azazel turned to him, his golden eyes sharp. Explain. Michael's expression was grave. Michael, sacred gears respond to the will of their wielder. But this is not a mere evolution. This is a transformation fueled by something beyond raw power. This is the embodiment of Issei Hayate's very soul. His rage. His despair. His desire to conquer. Sirzechs and Graphia, standing nearby, could only watch in stunned silence. Sirzechs' crimson eyes widened. Sirzechs, so Issei managed to evolve his boosted gear. Michael nodded. Obviously. Graphia's grip on her dress tightened. Graphia, then this means. Michael's gaze remained on the battlefield, watching as Issei flexed his newly enhanced form. Michael, this means that the Red Dragon Emperor is no longer bound by what we once understood. This is not simply balance breaker. This is something far beyond it. The sky crackled with crimson lightning. The ground trembled beneath Issei's sheer presence. The very air itself seemed to bow before his overwhelming might. The world had just witnessed the birth of something terrifying, and Issei was only getting started. Vala's breath was steady, but his mind raced. The energy rolling off Issei was unlike anything he had ever felt. It wasn't just power, it was authority. Something primal, something terrifying. His instincts screamed at him to move, to fight, to not let this transformation consume the battle entirely. Vali, what is this power? What have you become? Vala muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. Issei's glowing crimson eyes locked onto him. His aura crackled with raw energy, the sheer heat distorting the space around him. The draconic wings on his back flexed, the armored plating now jagged yet smooth, resembling those of a true dragon. His form was beyond anything that could be called human. This was something more. Something monstrous. Vala gritted his teeth. Vala, tch. This isn't over. Issei's gaze remained impassive. Use it, Vala frowned. Vala, use what? Issei, your juggernaut drive, Issei said, his voice unwavering, firm, as if it were a simple fact rather than a suggestion. A twisted grin spread across Vala's face, and then he burst into laughter. It was wild, almost hysterical. Vala, ha! Don't you think you're above me just because you got a little shiny? You think I need that to take you down? In an instant he disappeared, his speed breaking the sound barrier 1,000 times over as he reappeared in front of Issei, his fist already in motion, the sheer force of his movement causing the ground beneath him to crater. He struck, a direct hit. Issei barely flinched. Vala's eyes widened. What? Boost X000. The words barely left Issei's before a shockwave of unimaginable force erupted from his gauntlet. His entire arm glowed, crackling with condensed power, his aura surging as an unholy crimson dragon's head began to manifest around his gauntlet. Massive spectral jaws formed, lined with razor-sharp fangs, glowing eyes gleaming with pure destruction. Crimson Dragon Fang. The moment he thrust his fist forward, the spectral jaws clamped down. Space itself screamed as reality warped, the sheer force biting through the very fabric of existence. Energy bent and shattered, any form of resistance obliterated under the crushing force. Vala barely had time to react. He activated his demonic fist, summoning an immense force around his hand, black and violet energy swirling into a singularity. Demonic fist, shattered void, the two attacks met. The very air seemed to freeze, and then, a detonation of absolute destruction. The sky itself split apart. A crimson and silver shockwave tore through the battlefield, obliterating everything in its path. The ground fractured, mountains in the distance crumbled, and even the atmosphere above distorted. The clouds blasted away in an instant. When the light faded, Vali was standing, but his arm was almost gone, shredded flesh, torn muscle, exposed bone. His breath was ragged, his body barely able to stay upright. His silver hair was drenched in sweat, his face contorted in disbelief and fury. Issei stood before him, unscathed. His glowing eyes were still locked onto him, unwavering. "Vali, you held back," Vali muttered, his voice hoarse. Issei remained silent. A pulse of power surged around him. Slowly, he reached to his side, and in an instant, Ascalon manifested in his grasp. The dragon-slaying sword gleamed, its very presence radiating divine energy that countered even the mightiest of supernatural beings. Vali's eyes sharpened. He could feel it. Something dangerous. Something even worse than before. Issei raised the blade. Boost X000. The entire battlefield quaked. Divine power surged through Ascalon, the holy blade now glowing with an unrelenting golden white aura, enhanced 1,000-fold. The sheer energy around the sword warped the ground beneath him, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. He took a stance. His foot shifted. The sword hummed with power. Vali forced himself to move, preparing to dodge, but it was already too late. Sword technique. Holy Dragon Crescent Moon. A single swing. It was almost soundless. A golden crescent of pure destruction was unleashed, slicing through space itself. It was not just a wave of energy. It was a force of nature, a divine execution, a stroke of absolute judgment. Vali's instinct screamed. He teleported away at the last second, barely avoiding the direct impact, but his armor was shredded apart. The entirety of his left side had been slashed open, divine power coursing through the wound, negating any chance of immediate regeneration. He landed hard, coughing up blood. His mind raced, his body struggling to keep up. He looked up. Issei was still there, still standing, and still getting stronger. Rizavim Levan Lucifer watched from afar, his usual smug expression gone. His silver hair, always so immaculate, seemed dull under the sheer radiance of the battlefield. The pure destruction unfolding before his eyes was beyond anything he had anticipated. His mouth hung slightly open, his fingers twitching in discomfort. Rizavim, this is the power of the Red Dragon Emperor? He murmured, a bead of sweat forming on his forehead. Rizavim, no, this is beyond anything those past fools could ever achieve. Euclid Lucifuge clenched his fists, his analytical mind trying to rationalize what he was witnessing. His calculations were failing him. Every equation, every theory, every battle scenario he had envisioned crumbled under the sheer magnitude of Issei Hayate's transformation. Euclid, this shouldn't be possible, Euclid muttered. Euclid, sacred gears have a limit. They have thresholds. Balance breakers, juggernaut drive, those are the limits. So why, Shalba? Because he's broken those limits. Shalba Beelzebub interrupted, his tone filled with unease. Shalba, that's not a man fighting down there. That's a force of nature. A calamity wrapped in crimson armor. Rizavim's usual playfulness was absent. He clicked his tongue in irritation before forcing a smirk. Rizavim, tch. Still, this only makes things more interesting. If he keeps going down this path, well, we'll just have to see how much destruction he can cause before he burns out. But even he wasn't sure of his own words. Meanwhile, Team Vali stood frozen, watching their leader struggle against an opponent who was growing stronger by the second. Kuroka, usually composed, had her tails fluffed up, a clear sign of her nerves. She didn't like this. Not one bit. Kuroka, damn it, what the hell is that idiot doing? She muttered, her golden eyes flickering with worry. Biko had lost his usual grin. His staff was gripped tightly in his hands. Biko, I ain't never seen Vali struggle like this, not even against those gods. Arthur Pendragon, his sharp gaze fixated on the battlefield, took a slow breath. Arthur, this isn't just a battle anymore. This is an ascension. Issei Hayate, he's evolving mid-fight. Lu Fei gripped her staff, her quivering. Lu Fei, please don't let anything happen to them. They had fought countless battles together, seen Vali decimate enemies without effort, but this was different. This was the first time they had seen their leader pushed to the edge. And the worst part? Issei wasn't even done yet. The other factions watching the battle were no different in their shock. The Greek gods, who had long since known the Red Dragon Emperor's legend, found themselves standing on edge. Zeus, his mighty presence undeniable, narrowed his eyes. Zeus, this is troublesome. Ares grinned, but even his excitement was laced with tension. Ares, now this is what I call a battle. Ha! But that kid, he's not normal. Athena, ever the tactician, analyzed the situation. Athena, if this continues, he may surpass even the greatest of our gods. This is an evolution that defies logic. The Hindu faction watched in stunned silence. Lord Shiva, one of the strongest beings in existence, rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Shiva, interesting, is this what a mortal can become when faced with absolute struggle? Brahma sighed. Brahma, power like that, it may shake the entire balance of the world. The Shinto faction, watching from their divine realm, had their own concerns. Tamamonome, her 9 tails flickering in agitation, whispered, Tamamo, that power, it's unrefined, unstable. He is no longer just a host of the boosted gear. Amaterasu, the sun goddess, nodded. Amaterasu, his power is no longer just that of a sacred gear. He is merging with the very essence of the Red Dragon itself. Back outside the barrier, the leaders of heaven and the underworld stood in grim silence. Michael exhaled slowly, his golden eyes filled with a mix of sorrow and admiration. Michael, what have you become? Issei Hayadu. Azazel crossed his arms, his usual carefree attitude gone. His mind raced with possibilities, but none of them led to a peaceful resolution. Azazel, this isn't how sacred gears are supposed to work. This isn't just a power boost. This is something else entirely. Sirzechs Lucifer, the most powerful devil, could feel his fingers tremble slightly. Not out of fear, but out of the sheer uncertainty of what he was witnessing. Graphia, standing beside him, spoke softly. Graphia, Issei, has surpassed what we thought was possible. Sirzechs nodded. Sirzechs, unless Vali uses Juggernaut Drive, his survival is slim. Albion's voice echoed in Vala's mind. Albion, Vala. This battle has reached a point where hesitation means death. Issei is no longer simply an opponent. He is an entity of destruction. If you do not use Juggernaut Drive, you will not survive. Vala gritted his teeth. He hated that fact. Hated the idea of using that form. But as he looked up at Issei, standing there like an unstoppable force, he knew Albion was right. If he didn't push himself beyond his limits, he would die. Vala took a deep breath as the air around him crackled with overwhelming energy. His silver hair fluttered wildly, his eyes glowing with a deep, eerie blue. The time had come. If he hesitated for even a moment, he would die. He closed his eyes, his voice echoing with power as he began the chant. I, who am about to awaken. A powerful surge of demonic and draconic energy erupted from his body, shaking the very fabric of space around them. His armor gleamed as it began to change, warping and twisting under the sheer force of his evolution. I am the heavenly dragon who lost all to the principles of supremacy. His wings pulsed, glowing with divine radiance as layers of energy condensed into them, molding his body into something beyond mortal comprehension. His wings expanded, their silver glow illuminating the battlefield. I envied the infinite, and I pursued the dream. His aura exploded outward, warping the ground beneath him as storm-like winds blasted in every direction. I shall become the white dragon of supremacy, and I shall take you to the limits of innocence. With a final surge, the energy erupted into a cataclysmic explosion. The very sky above seemed to crack, unable to contain the raw force being unleashed. As the dust and light faded, Vala stood tall, his Juggernaut Drive fully activated. His armor was no longer sleek. It was jagged, covered in additional plating and glowing runes that pulsed with divine power. His wings had multiplied, radiating immense energy, and his claws shimmered with a sharpness that could cut through dimensions. His entire body exuded an aura of absolute domination. Issei stared at him, unimpressed. His crimson eyes, devoid of emotion, locked onto his opponent. About time, he muttered, his voice hollow, mechanical, and lifeless. With no hesitation, Issei raised his gauntlet. Boost X000. A surge of energy erupted, far greater than before. The very ground beneath him shattered into dust, unable to withstand the sheer force being drawn into his body. His form flickered, and in the blink of an eye he vanished. The next moment, he was right in front of Vali. Vali barely had time to react before Ascalon came slashing toward him at an impossible speed. He raised his clawed gauntlets, coating them in an intricate web of defensive magic layered over his own immense power. Sparks flew as steel met steel, and the battlefield exploded with raw energy. Boom! A shockwave tore through the area, flattening the surroundings and sending tremors through the earth. The sheer force of their clash distorted space itself, creating violent ripples that radiated outward. Vali gritted his teeth, his enhanced form barely keeping up with the sheer speed of Issei's strikes. Every time he parried Ascalon, another strike came at an even greater speed, forcing him further onto the defensive. Divide! A wave of power surged from his gauntlet as he attempted to have Issei's strength. A thin, crackling sphere formed around Issei, attempting to drain him. Divide! Another wave of energy pulsed, sapping more of Issei's power. Divide! Again, another division. Vali pushed harder, attempting to slow him down. But, boost X000, Issei's power surged back instantly, completely negating the drain. Vali's eyes widened as Ascalon slashed toward him once again, forcing him to teleport backward. There was no time to breathe. Issei reappeared right in front of him, his fist glowing with condensed power. The sheer weight of his presence made it feel as if gravity itself had been distorted. Vali barely had time to raise his defenses before the punch connected. Boom! The force sent him flying back, crashing through several layers of magical barriers that were erected around the battlefield. He hit the ground hard, leaving a deep crater in his wake. Vali growled, his frustration rising. Vali, damn it! He wiped the blood from his mouth and shot back into the sky, his aura flaring wildly. His wings stretched out as he charged an immense sphere of destructive energy. Vali, let's see you handle this. The sphere condensed rapidly before firing an enormous beam of energy, powerful enough to erase anything in its path. The sheer heat of the attack melted the ground before it even made contact. Issei responded immediately. Infinity Dragon Flare. A multi-layered explosion of crimson dragon energy erupted from his body, twisting and condensing into a raging inferno. The attack not only clashed with Vali's energy beam, it consumed it. Vali's eyes widened in disbelief as his own attack was swallowed whole. The flare intensified, feeding on the absorbed energy and multiplying in strength. The air trembled, and the very fabric of reality distorted as the attack surged toward him. There was no time to evade. Boom! The explosion engulfed Vali completely. The heavens themselves roared in response as the shockwaves spread across dimensions. The sheer magnitude of the impact caused distant observers to shield their eyes, their bodies trembling from the energy unleashed. Smoke and debris filled the sky. The battlefield was left in utter ruin, mountains leveled, the very ground scorched black. Then, a flicker of movement. Vali stumbled out of the smoke, his armor cracked, one of his wings missing, and blood dripping from his. His breathing was ragged, but his gaze was still fierce. Vali, he let out a pained chuckle. Vali, is that all you got? Issei appeared before him again, his gauntlet glowing ominously. Issei, no? This is only the beginning. Vali barely had a moment to react before another devastating strike came crashing toward him. The battle was far from over. Vali gritted his teeth as the air around him began to distort. His armor flickered, energy surging as he activated one of his ultimate techniques. Half-dimension. A pulse of power erupted from him, a vast wave of spatial compression distorting reality itself. Everything caught in its wake, the earth, the air, even the residual magic lingering in the battlefield began to shrink and collapse. The very fabric of space twisted violently as Vali exerted control over it, seeking to force Issei into nothingness. But Issei didn't move. Instead, he raised his hands, fingers forming a precise and deliberate sign. Crimson Dominion! The entire battlefield trembled. A deafening roar echoed as a massive dome of pure crimson energy erupted outward, engulfing everything within its radius. The sky darkened, suffused with an ominous red glow, while the air became thick with overwhelming draconic pressure. For a moment, Vali felt something unusual. His power, his very connection to magic was being drained. What dash? Vali's eyes widened. Inside the Crimson Dominion, all energy-based attacks were forcibly absorbed into Issei's boosted gear, rendering him immune to most magic. The very nature of the domain nullified external forces, sealing or suppressing abilities beyond a certain threshold. Worse yet, the longer the battle dragged on, the stronger Issei would become. A heavy silence fell upon the battlefield. Then, Boost X000, a tidal wave of energy exploded from Issei's body, filling the domain with raw, unstoppable power. His aura, once a controlled blaze, now raged like a hurricane, distorting space with its sheer intensity. His wings expanded, pulsating with overwhelming might. His gauntlets flared, exuding an ominous radiance. Issei's eyes locked onto Vali, his voice cold and devoid of mercy. Issei, your magic is meaningless here. Vali clenched his fists. His body felt heavier, slower. His half-dimension, one of his strongest techniques, was already breaking down under the pressure of Issei's domain. But he refused to be outdone. With a snarl, he propelled himself forward, his wings flaring as he coated his gauntlets in layers of compressed demonic energy. The ground beneath him shattered from the sheer force of his acceleration. In the blink of an eye, he was in front of Issei. A devastating punch shot toward Issei's face, backed by the full force of Juggernaut drive. The sheer impact distorted the space around them, creating ripples in the air. But Issei didn't even flinch. He caught Vali's fist effortlessly, his grip like iron. The force of the impact sent a shockwave outward, but Issei remained unmoved. Vali's eyes widened. Then, Boost X000, a pulse of energy erupted from Issei's body, and before Vali could react, Issei twisted his grip, sending him hurtling through the air like a meteor. Boom! Vali crashed into the ground with earth-shattering force, sending debris flying in every direction. The very ground crumbled beneath him, forming a massive crater. Issei was already above him. With terrifying speed, he brought down his gauntlet. Boom! Vali barely managed to roll away as the impact shattered the land where he had just been. He coughed, gritting his teeth. His power was being drained faster than he could replenish it. His regeneration was struggling. His speed was slowing. He had to move. With a furious roar, he activated Divide again. Divide! A pulse of energy shot toward Issei, attempting to have his power, but inside the Crimson Dominion. Boost X000, Issei's power instantly multiplied again, rendering the attempt useless. Vali's eyes widened in disbelief. Vali, that's impossible! Before he could react, Issei appeared right in front of him. His gauntlet shimmered with draconic energy, forming the spectral jaws of a massive dragon. Crimson Dragon Fang. The spectral dragon jaws lunged forward, their fangs glistening with unrelenting power. The attack ignored defenses, cutting through energy and space itself. Vali roared, raising both arms as he condensed layers upon layers of defensive magic around himself. He had no choice but to withstand the hit. Boom! The impact was cataclysmic. The air itself cracked as shockwaves tore through the battlefield. The sheer pressure obliterated everything in its wake, sending tremors across the realm. When the dust cleared, Vali was kneeling, blood dripping from his mouth. His armor was cracked. His body was covered in deep lacerations. His right arm hung limply at his side, nearly shattered. Issei stood before him, completely unharmed. His aura had only grown stronger. Vali panted, struggling to stand. His pride refused to let him fall. But deep down, he knew he couldn't win like this. Issei tilted his head, his voice calm yet merciless. Issei, your power is fading, Vali. You have no future in this fight. Vali let out a weak chuckle. Vali, damn, I hate to admit it, but I might actually die here. Issei raised his gauntlet. His entire arm crackled with overwhelming energy. Boost X000. Vali felt a chill run down his spine. He had to act now, but it was already too late. Issei clenched his fist. Holy Dragon Crescent Moon! A devastating arc of energy erupted from his gauntlet, slicing through space itself. The sheer magnitude of the attack distorted reality, creating rifts in the air. It was heading straight for Vali. He had no choice. Vali gathered what little power remained within him. He poured everything into one final defense. His wings expanded, his aura flaring as he braced himself. And then, boom! The impact engulfed him entirely. A massive explosion erupted, shaking the very foundations of the battlefield. The sky roared in protest. Mountains crumbled. The earth split apart. The battlefield had long since ceased to resemble anything recognizable. The land had been shattered beyond repair, and even the air itself trembled under the weight of the sheer power being unleashed. Yet the battle had not yet reached its climax. Vali stood, his breath ragged, his body barely holding itself together. A deep, gaping wound had formed on his chest, exposing parts of his juggernaut drive armor. The wound was unlike anything he had sustained before, refusing to heal no matter how much demonic energy he circulated through his body. His regeneration once his lifeline was failing him. Even the Cow's Brigade, who had been watching in stunned silence, were finally showing expressions of disbelief and awe. Chow Chow, so he's going to use the Longinus drive, Chow Chow murmured, his usually composed demeanor wavering for the first time. His grip on his spear tightened. Chow Chow, what will you do now, Issei? Among the gods who had gathered, Odin observed the battle with an unreadable expression. The other deities beside him, Zeus, Shiva, Hades, and Susanoo, stood in grim silence. This was no longer a mere battle between two warriors. Odin, it seems the fight is approaching its conclusion, Odin finally said, stroking his beard. His ancient eyes gleamed with something between fascination and fear. Far above, the dragon kings had been watching in silent awe. Even the mighty dragons, beings of destruction themselves, were shaken by what they were witnessing. Tiamat crossed her arms, her gaze fixated on Issei. Tiamat, these two are the strongest of their kind, but the red one, he's no longer just a heavenly dragon. Yulong exhaled heavily. Yulong, with this much power being thrown around, how is the world even still standing? And then, Issei exhaled, lowering his gaze to Vala. His voice was quiet. Boost X0000. Time itself seemed to stop. The air howled violently, the ground cracked, and the sky split apart as an impossible surge of power erupted from Issei's body. His aura, already monstrous beyond belief, expanded to an unfathomable degree. It was no longer an aura, it was an entity of destruction, a force that could rewrite the laws of reality. Every being watching, human, devil, angel, dragon, and god, felt their very souls tremble. Did he just boost himself to 10,000? The cries of disbelief rang through the battlefield and beyond. Even the strongest warriors present couldn't believe what they had just heard. The condensed energy swirling around Issei thickened, warping his already powerful armor into a second-stage form. His gauntlets, wings, and entire frame shimmered with an otherworldly glow, far surpassing any form he had previously displayed. But he wasn't finished. In his right hand, the same energy condensed, swirling into a single focal point, compressing into something that defied all logic. The sheer force of it warped space itself, causing cracks to appear in the fabric of reality. It was no longer just raw power, it was something far more refined, more absolute. Issei raised his hand, and for the first time, he spoke a chant that had never been uttered before. From the depths of my soul, from the core of my power, the dragon's wrath, the fury of annihilation, condense, refine, purify, become the absolute spear that erases all before me. The very sky darkened. The heavens groaned in protest. The stars seemed to dim. This attack was not meant for a battlefield. It was not meant for a single opponent. It was destruction incarnate, something meant to erase all that stood before it. Issei clenched his fist. True crimson annihilation. Vala's eyes widened. Even in his juggernaut drive state, his instincts screamed at him. This attack, if it hit, would be the end. He had no choice. With his last reserves of power, he unleashed everything he had. Longinus Smasher, a pillar of pure, blinding energy from his chest, were unimaginable power, and then, both attacks collided. The impact was cataclysmic, a single moment of silence. Then, boom! A world-ending explosion detonated, shaking not just the battlefield but the entire dimension itself. The very laws of existence shattered. The blast consumed the heavens and the earth, swallowing everything in an infinite sea of crimson and silver annihilation. The explosion was so vast, so unrelenting, that it expanded far beyond the realm they were in, threatening to erase the very world itself. But then, just as the destruction reached its peak, it suddenly collapsed. A paradoxical force intervened. Space folded upon itself, swallowing the explosion into another dimension, forcefully redirecting it before it could consume all of existence. When the light faded, when the impossible explosion finally ceased, only one figure remained standing, Issei Hayadu, and at his feet, Vala Lucifer lay motionless. His body was nearly destroyed. His armor was shattered beyond recognition. His left arm was missing entirely, and his right was barely intact. His wings, once symbols of his overwhelming power, had been burned away. Blood pooled beneath him, his breathing so faint it was almost imperceptible. Issei held up his hand, crimson energy swirling violently within his palm as he aimed it at Vala. The orb of destruction pulsed with raw power, radiating enough force to obliterate what little remained of the battlefield. His gaze, unwavering, locked onto his battered rival, whose body barely held together after their devastating clash. Issei, this is it, Vala. Issei spoke with finality, his voice steady but tinged with exhaustion. Vala remained still, his body refusing to move. He had no more strength left to counter, no power to fight back. And yet, even in his broken state, his eyes held no fear. He simply watched, waiting for what was to come. Then, Issei suddenly stopped. The orb of destruction in his hand flickered and dimmed, his fingers trembling ever so slightly. The world seemed to hold its breath as the factions watching from afar grew confused. The Norse, Greek, Shinto, and even the Hindu gods, including Shiva and Indra, all silently wondered the same thing. Why was Issei hesitating? Shiva, who had been quietly observing the battle, let out a sigh as he crossed his arms. Shiva, it's already over, he murmured. As if answering his words, a violent burst of energy shot out from Issei's back. His entire body seized up, his mouth opening in a silent scream before his voice finally erupted in an agonized wail. The sheer pain in his cry sent a chill down the spines of everyone present. Team Vela watched in horror, especially Le Fay and Kuroka. Le Fay, and no, what's happening to him? Le Fay's voice trembled as she clutched her staff. Kuroka's golden eyes widened in shock, her claws tightening into fists. Issei, she shouted, her tone filled with uncharacteristic panic. She had never heard such pain before, not from him, not from anyone. Somewhere, Kunu covered her mouth with both hands, her small frame trembling as tears welled up in her eyes. Issei, she whimpered, unable to look away from the horrifying sight. Yasaka, standing behind her daughter, clenched her fists, her golden eyes narrowing in both sorrow and unease. Yasaka, this isn't normal, she muttered. Yasaka, something's terribly wrong. The crimson armor that had once protected Issei began to crack, fractures spreading like broken glass. Energy burst from his very skin, his body barely able to contain the sheer force building within him. His screams only grew louder, his agony evident to all who watched. Then, the armor shattered completely. Raw power surged from his exposed body, veins glowing beneath his skin as if his very existence was unraveling. His hands clawed at the air, his face contorted in unbearable pain. His skin cracked, deep fissures splitting open across his body, and from those wounds, blood erupted in violent bursts. His eyes, usually burning with determination, were now filled with something else entirely. Terror. Please! Issei choked, his voice barely a whisper as blood trickled from his mouth. His trembling hand reached out desperately. Issei, someone, help me! Before anyone could react, a sudden force surged through the battlefield, sending shockwaves in all directions. Sirzechs barely had time to react before he and the other leaders were violently thrown back. Michael, Azazel, and Graphia all crashed into the ground, landing with enough force to carve trenches into the ruined terrain. Azazel groaned in pain, his wings twitching as he tried to lift himself. Azazel, damn it, someone ambushed us, he spat, his golden eyes narrowing as he surveyed the battlefield. Sirzechs gritted his teeth, crimson power flaring around him. His body trembled slightly from the sheer force of the impact. Who? He muttered, his mind racing. Who could have done this? Who had enough power to send them flying like mere insects? I would, a voice answered, empty. Hollow. Void of any emotion. Everyone turned toward the source. Azazel's eyes widened in pure shock. Ophis. He whispered. There, standing amidst the wreckage, was the infinite dragon god herself. The silent force of nature that even the most powerful beings in the world feared. Her presence alone sent an unnatural chill through the air, her aura dense enough to feel suffocating. Sirzechs forced himself up, his crimson aura flaring dangerously. His instincts screamed at him, but he pushed the fear aside. Sirzechs, we won't let you harm them, he declared firmly. Ophis remained unfazed. Ophis, that isn't for you to decide, she said coldly. Dark energy swirled around him, the unmistakable power of destruction, Baal's legendary ability, yet even more refined, more absolute. Michael, ever the diplomat, took a step forward, his expression serious. Michael, Ophis, what do you want? He asked cautiously. The dragon god's gaze remained impassive as she looked directly at him. Ophis, I want the Red Dragon Emperor, she stated simply. Ophis, now stand down. Or else. A terrifying wave of killing intent filled the air, causing even the strongest of warriors to instinctively flinch. Azazel gritted his teeth, summoning his downfall dragon's spear, golden energy crackling along its length. Azazel, We won't let you. Graphia's cold silver eyes never left Issei's fragile form. Graphia, we have to hurry, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Graphia, they don't have much time left. Sirzechs exhaled deeply, but his resolve did not waver. Sirzechs, this is the infinite dragon god, he reminded them. Sirzechs, we cannot afford to hold back. Without hesitation, Michael and Azazel attacked. Light spears formed instantly, coated with divine ice and infused with destruction magic. The combined force of their attacks should have been enough to shake even a god. Ophis did not move. With a mere flick of her wrist, purple snakes manifested in the air, each one radiating an ominous aura. The moment the spears neared her, the serpents lunged, devouring the attacks in an instant. Not a single trace of power remained. She let out a quiet snort, her expression unreadable. Ophis, stay out of this, she said dismissively. Ophis, this is a matter of the dragon gods, not the affairs of puny faction leaders. Michael and Azazel tensed, prepared to attack again, but those words made them hesitate. They knew the truth. Ophis could erase the three factions if she truly desired. And worse, if this battle drew the attention of Great Red. Sirzechs clenched his fists, his mind racing. His crimson gaze flickered with countless thoughts before he finally made his decision. Sirzechs, all of you stand down, he commanded. Azazel turned to him, disbelief in his voice. Azazel, Sirzechs, you can't. Sirzechs, at our full strength, we can stall her. Sirzechs interrupted, his voice firm. Sirzechs, but if she's serious, what are our chances of survival? Azazel gritted his teeth but did not answer. Ophis watched him with mild interest. Ophis, you're smarter than I expected, she remarked. Without another word, she stepped forward and lifted Issei's barely conscious body. His skin continued to crack, blood seeping from his wounds as his life force flickered. Then, in an instant, she vanished. Vali groaned as he stirred awake, his body feeling heavy and foreign. His silver hair stuck to his forehead, damp with sweat, and as he tried to move, a dull pain shot through his limbs. It was then he noticed his arms and legs didn't feel the same. Looking down, he saw metallic replacements where flesh used to be. Scars traced lines across his chest, his legs, even his neck. He blinked, processing what he was seeing. Vali, where am I? His voice was hoarse, his throat dry. He turned his head slightly, taking in the sight of a sterile hospital room, the scent of disinfectant hanging in the air. Vali, I'm not dead, a familiar voice echoed in his mind. You were almost there. Vali's eyes widened slightly. Albion? Yes, the dragon's voice was calm, yet there was a weight to it, as if he too was still processing what had happened. Vali clenched his fists. Vali, then Issei didn't kill me? No, Albion answered. Albion, he didn't get the chance. His body couldn't handle the strain of that form. He was suffering from the backlash before he could finish you. Vali's mind reeled. He had expected to die in that battle. That was supposed to be his moment to clash with Issei at their peaks, to prove who was superior. Yet, in the end, either of them had claimed victory. Vali, so he's dead? Albion, no. He was taken by Ophis. Vali's breath itched. His entire body tensed at the words. What the hell? The door to his room creaked open, and Vali was soon placed into a wheelchair. His body still felt weak, but his mind was sharper than ever. He needed answers. As he was wheeled into the reception area, he was met with the faces of many. Azazel stood near the center, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. The leaders of the three factions were present, their faces grim. Team Vali was there as well, Lefay wiping away tears, Arthur standing with his arms folded, his usual composed demeanor shaken. Lefay ran up to him. Lefay, Vali. You're okay, Arthur sighed. Arthur, we thought we were going to lose you. Vali exhaled deeply, still coming to terms with his survival. Vali, I didn't believe I'd make it either. His silver eyes scanned the room, locking onto Azazel. Vali, but that doesn't matter. Issei was taken by Ophis, correct? Rias, standing to the side, nodded, her expression filled with regret. Rias, yes, we all saw it happen. Zenobia clenched her fists. Zenobia, but what happened to him? Why did Ophis take him? Azazel sighed, rubbing his forehead. Azazel, that's what I'd like to know. It doesn't make sense. What would she want with him? Sirzechs frowned. I don't know. Asia's voice was small as she whispered. Asia, I feel like it was our fault. Kiba placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. Kiba, don't think like that, Asia. Gasper sniffled, his eyes watery. Gasper, oh, Issei. Sona adjusted her glasses, her sharp mind already trying to piece things together. Sona, the real question is why would she do that? What business does Ophis have with him? Kuroka's golden eyes narrowed. Kuroka, you think she wants to recruit him? We all saw his power, what if he aroused her interest? Azazel tapped his fingers against his arm. Azazel, that could be a possibility. Sona frowned. Sona, and obviously, there's no way for us to even try and save him. Rosweiss crossed her arms. Rosweiss, even if we could, how would we even combat 2 dragon gods? Akino bit her lip, frustration evident in her trembling voice. Akino, but we have to do something. Kaneko nodded, her voice unusually fierce. Kaneko, we can't just sit here while Ophis does who knows what with him. Azazel's tone turned stern. Azazel, you all will do nothing. Rias turned to him sharply. Rias, but he's my pawn. Sirzechs' voice boomed across the room, his power flaring slightly. Sirzechs, Rias. You and your peerage will do nothing. Have I made myself clear? Rias flinched at the sheer authority in his tone. Her trembled, but she could only nod. Tsubaki spoke up, her voice thoughtful. Tsubaki, remember Issei wouldn't be able to survive in the dimensional gap. And in his condition, it would be even worse. Ophis must have taken him somewhere else. Michael nodded. Michael, that is a possibility. But Ophis is a dragon god, she may have used a method to prevent the effects of the dimensional gap from harming him. Azazel exhaled deeply, his mind racing. Azazel, let's just focus on what we can do. Tsubaki might be onto something. Graphia, who had been silent all this time, finally spoke, her voice soft. Graphia, I just hope he's okay. Across various realms and factions, rumors spread like wildfire. The battle between the Red Dragon Emperor and the White Dragon Emperor had been monumental, shaking the very foundations of the supernatural world. But what came after was even more concerning. Ophis, the infinite dragon god, had intervened. The implications were massive. Did this have something to do with the Chaos Brigade? Was Ophis acting on her own? Or was there a deeper plan at play? The leaders of various factions convened in urgent meetings, trying to make sense of what had transpired. In Asgard, Odin sat at the head of a large table, his one eye narrowed in thought. Thor stood beside him, arms crossed, his hammer resting against his shoulder. Odin exhaled, leaning on his staff. Odin, a battle between the dragon emperors of this era was inevitable, but Ophis taking Hayate Issei that complicates things. Thor frowned. Thor, does this mean the Chaos Brigade is making a move? Or is she acting alone? Vidar, the god of vengeance, scoffed. Vidar, Ophis is not known for taking sides. If she took the Red Dragon Emperor, there must be a reason. Odin hummed. Odin, or perhaps she sees potential in him. The Dragon Emperors have always been powerful, but never before has one pushed their body to such limits. If what we've heard is true, Hayate Issei nearly destroyed himself. Thor nodded. Thor, and that means he reached a power level that even Ophis found interesting. Meanwhile, in Mount Olympus, Zeus leaned back in his throne, lightning crackling at his fingertips. The Greek gods had already been made aware of the situation, and the council was in disarray. Hera frowned. Hera, the infinite dragon god, rarely acts. What would make her intervene now? Ares grinned. Ares, maybe she wants a mate. Artemis shot him a glare. Artemis, this is not a joke. Ares. Hades spoke from the shadows, his skeletal fingers tapping against the armrest of his chair. Hades, Ophis is beyond mortal desires. If she took the Red Dragon Emperor, there is something bigger at play. Poseidon ran a hand through his beard. Poseidon, does this concern us? Ophis does not meddle in our affairs. Zeus frowned. Zeus, it concerns all of us. The balance of power shifts with every move a dragon god makes. In Takamagara, Amaterasu stood before a gathering of Shinto deities. Susanoo, Tsukuyomi, and several other gods watched as she gracefully folded her arms. Amaterasu, this battle, this event, it will have repercussions, she said softly. Tsukuyomi, the god of the moon, narrowed his eyes. Tsukuyomi, the Red Dragon Emperor is powerful, but he is still young. Why would Ophis take an interest in him? Susanoo, the storm god, let out a deep chuckle. Susanoo, perhaps she sees him as a tool. Amaterasu shook her head. Amaterasu, Ophis does not need tools. If she acted, it means she sees something in him that we do not. Meanwhile, in Kyoto, the Yukai faction was also in turmoil. Yasaka sat with her advisors, her face lined with worry. Yasaka, I saw it myself, she whispered. Yasaka, his body, it was breaking apart. Kunu, sitting beside her, clutched her hands tightly. Kunu, will we ever see him again? An elder Yukai sighed. Elder, Ophis is a mystery to all. If she has taken him, we may never know her intentions. At the same time, among the Dragon Kings, tension ran high. Tannen sat in deep thought, his wings twitching as he listened to the discussion around him. Yulong, the great Eastern Dragon, spoke first. Yulong, Ophis taking the Red Dragon Emperor? This is not normal, Fafnir grumbled. Fafnir, Issei was strong, but why would she care? Midgardsormr, ancient and wise, spoke in a low rumble. Tannen nodded. Tannen, if he has attracted the attention of Ophis, then the world may soon change. Across every faction, every realm, the same questions were asked. What did Ophis see in the Red Dragon Emperor? And more importantly, what was coming next? In the endless void of the dimensional gap, space twisted and turned in ways incomprehensible to mortal minds. Two figures stood in the vast nothingness, surrounded by swirling energies of chaos and creation. Great Red, in her human form, leaned against the invisible fabric of the void, arms crossed, her crimson-red hair flowing behind her like a roaring flame. Her golden eyes gleamed with curiosity as she observed the cocoon-like sphere in front of them. Within it, the body of Hayate Issei floated, his form undergoing a process never before attempted. Ophis stood beside her, expression as cold and emotionless as ever, but her eyes remained locked onto the cocoon, unwavering in their focus. Great Red broke the silence first. Great Red, how long do you think it will take? Ophis didn't shift her gaze. Ophis, I do not know. Great Red sighed, running a hand through her hair. Great Red, his body and soul were nearly destroyed. He was on the verge of death. Even with both our powers, there's no guarantee this will work. Ophis' voice was steady. It has to. Great Red let out a small chuckle. Great Red, you sound desperate. That's new. Ophis finally turned to look at her. Ophis, this is the only way. Great Red smirked. Great Red, so you truly believe in him, huh? We combine my flesh and power with your infinite life essence, fusing them into his very being. That means he'll inherit both of our strengths. But the real question is, how strong will he become? Ophis was quiet for a moment before responding. Ophis, stronger than us or weaker? I do not know. Great Red laughed, a deep and hearty sound. Great Red, a third dragon god, huh? The supernatural world is going to lose its mind when they find out. Ophis didn't react to her amusement. Ophis, I do not care. Great Red observed her sister's expression, noting the tension in her normally impassive face. Great Red, you really love him, don't you? Ophis' cheeks tinted pink, but her voice remained even. Yes, Great Red smirked. Great Red, since when did my little sister develop emotions? Ophis turned away. He makes me happy. Great Red raised an eyebrow. Great Red, that's a dangerous thing, you know. If you care about him this much, it means you're vulnerable. Ophis' grip tightened slightly. Ophis, I do not care. Great Red sighed, stretching her arms. Great Red, well, since my adorable little sister is so invested in this guy, I suppose I should keep an eye on him too. Ophis immediately turned to her, her expression darkening. Ophis, you will not harm him. Great Red raised a hand in mock surrender. Great Red, relax, relax. If I wanted to harm him, why would I have given up my flesh to help in his transformation? Ophis narrowed her eyes. Great Red grinned. Great Red, in fact, I'll do you one better. I'll help train him. If he's going to inherit our powers, he needs to know how to use them. Ophis remained silent for a moment before nodding. Ophis, that is acceptable. Great Red's expression darkened slightly. Great Red, but let's be clear, if he ever turns against us, if he ever uses our power selfishly or threatens our existence, I won't hesitate to destroy him. Ophis' eyes turned cold. Ophis, I know. That will not happen. Great Red studied her face before sighing. Great Red, you really do trust him, don't you? Ophis nodded without hesitation. I do. Great Red exhaled, watching the cocoon pulsate with energy. Great Red, then let's wait. This will take time. Ophis' voice, usually devoid of emotion, wavered just slightly. Ophis, Issei, please wake up soon. The tension in the supernatural world had reached its peak. It had been 6 months since the battle between Issei and Vali, 6 months since the Red Dragon Emperor had been taken by Ophis into the unknown. The three factions had exhausted every possible method to locate him, but there was nothing, no trace, no hint of his whereabouts, only uncertainty and speculation. The longer time dragged on, the more doubt spread. Vali sat in his chair, his newly replaced limbs feeling almost natural by now. Thanks to Phoenix Tears, Asia's healing, Kuroka's support, and Azazel's expertise in technology, he was back in action. But despite his return, things had only grown worse. Vali sighed. Vali, those cows brigade bastards won't stop. It's already getting tiring. Arthur, polishing his sword, nodded. Arthur, same here. They've been pressing harder ever since Issei disappeared. His absence created a power vacuum. Kuroka, sitting on the table with a lazy posture, flicked her ears. Kuroka, due to the absence of Issei, the biblical faction has been weakened. Naya. Vali frowned. Vali, they relied on him too much. Biko leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Biko, it's already been 6 months. I don't think he's alive. Lu Fei hesitated, glancing down. Lu Fei, I'm not sure either. But Ophis took him for a reason. Maybe she needed him for something? Vali clicked his tongue. Vali, if he's alive, he better come back soon. If he's dead, then we're wasting our time hoping. The room fell silent. Meanwhile, in the occult research club, Zenobia and Kiba had just finished training when they entered the clubroom, only to be met with the sound of quiet sobbing. The scene before them was one of sadness. Asia sat on the couch, tears streaming down her face as Irina held her, whispering soothing words. Zenobia frowned. Zenobia, what's going on? Kiba's brows knitted in concern. Kiba, Asia, are you all right? Asia looked up at them, her eyes red and puffy. Asia, what do you think? Irina let out a sigh. It's about Issei. Zenobia crossed her arms. Zenobia, oh Asia, please move on. Issei is gone. Asia's face twisted in anguish. Asia, we didn't even get to apologize for what we did. You saw the way he looked at us last time. He looked at me like he wished he never met me. Why didn't I just keep my mouth shut? Her sobs grew louder. Zenobia scowled. Zenobia, crying will absolutely do nothing. Her sharp tones startled Asia. Zenobia continued, her voice filled with frustration. Zenobia, he's gone. Not coming back. Asia shot up from her seat, glaring at Zenobia with a mixture of sorrow and rage. Asia, you don't know that, she yelled. Zenobia met her glare with equal intensity. Asia clenched her fists. Asia, why do you care? All you ever wanted was his sperm. The words hit Zenobia like a dagger. Her jaw clenched, and her hands trembled with suppressed emotion. Kiba quickly stepped between them. Kiba, enough, guys. Arguing won't solve anything. Just then, the door opened, and Rosweiss walked in, hearing the last part of the argument. She rubbed her temple. Rosweiss, Kiba is right. Arguing won't do anything. Asia looked at her with desperate eyes. Asia, so what should we do then? Rosweiss hesitated. Rosweiss, I don't know. The room fell silent until another voice cut through. What is going on here? Everyone turned to see Rias standing at the door, arms crossed, concern evident on her face. Kiba let out a sigh. Kiba, it's about Issei. Rias' face darkened. Rias, Asia, we all miss him. It's been months, and the 3 factions still haven't found anything. Aquino, standing beside her, nodded. Aquino, even though we haven't heard from him, the 3 factions haven't given up. Gasper, who had been silent until now, lowered his head. Gasper, even if he comes back, what makes you think he'll look at us the same way again? His voice trembled, his small frame shaking as he held back tears. Kaneko, who had been sitting on the couch quietly, finally moved, reaching out to pat Gasper's back. Kaneko, crying and getting sad won't bring him back. Gasper sniffled. I know, Rias sighed, feeling the weight of their emotions. Rias, everyone, it's best we take a break. The room was filled with silent nods, but in their hearts, none of them truly felt at ease. The uncertainty was unbearable, and none of them knew what the future held. Issei felt weightless, as if he were floating in a sea of darkness. But within that darkness, fragments of light flickered, memories, moving like scenes from a movie, playing before his eyes. Some were familiar, moments from his life that he could recall without effort. But then, there was something else, something different. A scene unfolded, showing a small boy, no older than 7, running through a lush green field. He was laughing, his young voice filled with joy. And beside him, a girl walked at his pace, watching him with an unreadable expression. Her long, jet-black hair swayed with each step, and her piercing, serpent-like eyes held a quiet intensity. Issei's breath caught in his throat. That boy was him. But the girl, Ophis? He muttered, his voice barely a whisper. His past self was playing with her, throwing small stones into a river, giggling every time they made a splash. Ophis, your throw is weak, the young Ophis remarked, her voice the same as he remembered, calm, quiet, but with the faintest trace of amusement. Past Issei, hey! That one was good. 7-year-old Issei pouted, puffing his cheeks in defiance. Ophis tilted her head. No. Watch. She picked up a stone, her delicate fingers closing around it, and with a flick of her wrist, she sent it skimming across the water's surface. The rock bounced 7, 8, 9 times before disappearing into the distance. Young Issei gawked. Past Issei, that's not fair. You're like crazy strong. Ophis blinked. Ophis, of course. I am a dragon god. He pouted again but quickly broke into laughter. Past Issei, still, that was amazing. You have to teach me how to do that. Ophis stared at him for a long moment before nodding. Okay. The memories shifted, fast-forwarding like a reel of film. More scenes flashed by him and Ophis sitting beneath a tree, eating sweets together. Ophis curiously poking his cheek when he fell asleep in her lap. Issei calling her his best friend, grinning from ear to ear. And then, a moment that made his heart stop. Ophis leaning in close to his tiny frame, placing her finger against his forehead. Ophis, I will mark you as mine, she said simply. Past Issei, huh? What does that mean? 7-year-old Issei asked, blinking up at her in confusion. Ophis, it means you are my mate. My chosen one, Ophis stated as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Mate? His young face scrunched up. Past Issei, like in those animal shows? Ophis nodded. Issei tilted his head. Past Issei, but I don't really get it. You will, she said, pressing her forehead against his. One day, the warmth of that touch burned into his mind, even as the memory continued to play. But then, the atmosphere changed. The colors dimmed, and the weight of something heavy settled over the scene. Young Issei looked up at Ophis, his bright eyes dull with sadness. Past Issei, you're leaving? Ophis stared at him in silence. Past Issei, but why? We were supposed to play again tomorrow. Her parted slightly, and for the first time, her voice held something other than neutrality. Hesitation. Ophis, I must return to the dimensional gap. It is my home. Past Issei, but why can't I come with you? Issei's tiny hands clenched into fists, his voice shaking. Past Issei, you promised you wouldn't leave me alone. Ophis knelt down, bringing herself to his level. You will forget me, his breath hitched. Forget? She nodded. Ophis, I will seal these memories. You will not remember until the time is right. Tears welled in his young eyes, but he furiously wiped them away. Past Issei, that's not fair. Why do I have to forget you? I don't want to. Ophis lifted her hand, placing it against his forehead once more. Ophis, because if you remember, you will seek me out. And you are not ready for that world yet. Past Issei, I don't care. I just want you to stay. His voice cracked, his small frame trembling. Ophis hesitated for only a moment before she did something unexpected. She wrapped her arms around him, pulling him into a gentle embrace. Issei's young self froze. Ophis had never get him before. Ophis, one day, you will understand, she whispered against his ear. Past Issei, I don't want to understand, he mumbled, gripping onto her tightly, his face buried in her shoulder. You will, she repeated, pulling back slightly. She pressed her forehead against his once more, her fingers glowing faintly as she prepared to seal his memories. Ophis, I promise, I will return to you when the time is right. Issei's vision blurred. His small voice cracked as he whispered, Past Issei, Ophis, please don't go. Darkness swallowed the scene, and then everything disappeared. Great Red stared in disbelief, her golden eyes wide as she watched the process unfold before her. The very space of the dimensional gap trembled violently, its chaotic energy reacting to the phenomenon taking place before them. The cocoon of draconic energy, which had been steadily pulsating for months, now roared with an overwhelming force, sending ripples of power across the void. The essence of infinity and dreams, two completely separate and absolute forces, were fusing into something new. Something unheard of. Great Red, holy shit, Great Red shouted, her usually smug demeanor replaced by genuine shock. Ophis, standing beside her, remained expressionless, but the subtle twitch in her fingers betrayed her concern. Ophis, big sister, what is happening? Great Red shook her head, her crimson locks whipping around. Great Red, he's not just absorbing our powers separately, he's merging them. He's taking infinity, my dreams, and somehow weaving them together into a single concept. That shouldn't be possible. Ophis stared at the glowing cocoon, her serpentine eyes narrowing. Great Red gritted her teeth. Great Red, infinity means endlessness, no limits, an absolute state of existence. Dreams are limitless potential, the ability to create and shape anything within the mind's will. They should be separate. Opposing, even. One is pure existence. The other is pure imagination. Ophis remained silent, watching as the power within the cocoon fluctuated wildly. Great Red growled. Great Red, no being, no dragon should be capable of combining these two forces. Not even you or I. She turned to Ophis, her expression intense. Great Red, even we have our limits. Your infinity may be absolute, but it is still defined by what exists. My dreams allow me to manifest anything, but they are still bound by the mind's perception. But this guy, she pointed at the cocoon. Great Red, he's breaking those barriers. He's taking the limitless existence of infinity, and the boundless potential of dreams and forcing them into something new. A sudden pulse of energy exploded outward, cutting her off. The dimensional gap itself howled in protest, space warping uncontrollably around them. Ophis narrowed her eyes. Ophis, he is rewriting the fundamental laws of what a dragon god can be. Great Red clenched her fists. Great Red, exactly. That's why this shouldn't be possible. He should have burned out. His body should have crumbled under the strain. Even gods would be annihilated trying to contain those two forces together. But not him somehow. Another pulse erupted from the cocoon, this time larger, and the very fabric of reality around them seemed to shift. The stars beyond the dimensional gap flickered, as if reacting to the transformation within. Great Red exhaled sharply. Great Red, Ophis, if this works, if he survives this. She turned to her sister, her usual playful tone completely gone. Great Red, you do realize what this means, right? Ophis did not respond immediately. She simply continued to watch, her eyes focused solely on the cocoon. Her mind processed everything, the absurdity of it, the impossibility, the sheer defiance of logic. And yet, despite all of that, a small, almost imperceptible smile formed on her. Yes, she finally said. I do. Great Red stared at her before letting out a long sigh. Great Red, damn it, why do I feel like we're about to have a problem on our hands? Ophis glanced at her. A problem? Great Red smirked, though there was still unease in her golden eyes. Great Red, think about it. If he truly becomes something beyond us, something that neither infinity nor dreams alone could ever achieve, then there will be consequences. The entire supernatural world will be thrown into chaos. Ophis nodded. Ophis, I do not care. Great Red scoffed. Great Red, of course you don't. You just want your little mate back. Ophis did not deny it. Instead, she simply continued watching the cocoon as another surge of energy erupted. This time, the force was so powerful that even Great Red had to take a step back. Great Red, this is insane. Great Red muttered, shielding her face with her arm. Great Red, I swear, if he comes out of this with some ridiculous reality-warping abilities, I'm going to. The energy suddenly stabilized. Everything became eerily silent. The chaos, the surges, the trembling of the dimensional gap, it all stopped, as if reality itself was holding its breath. Great Red and Ophis both stiffened, their eyes locked on the cocoon as it began to crack. The golden red energy of dreams intertwined with the infinite darkness of Ophis's power, coiling around the figure emerging from within. A low, deep breath echoed. Then, eyes opened, and the world changed. The entire world trembled. Reality itself was shifting, twisting, resisting something that defied all understanding. The sky cracked like fragile glass, and for a brief moment, every single being in the supernatural world felt an overwhelming pressure pressing against their very souls. Shiva gritted his teeth as he sat among the Hindu pantheon, his fingers tightening into a fist. The air was thick with tension, the very fabric of existence around them vibrating unnaturally. It was subtle, barely noticeable to mortals, but to gods, to beings of divinity, it was as if the foundation of the world was crumbling. Indra, what the hell is going on? Indra growled, his golden eyes scanning the room. His usual arrogance was gone, replaced by something dangerously close to fear. Indra, I have never felt something like this before. Vishnu's normally serene expression was dark, his gaze distant as if peering beyond reality itself. Vishnu, something is forcing the world to change. Kali, the goddess of destruction, leaned forward, her crimson eyes flickering with unease. Kali, the laws of existence, they are rebelling against something. No being rewritten. Shiva exhaled, his divine aura rippling outward. Shiva, this isn't natural. Something is interfering with the very concept of reality itself. His eyes narrowed. But what? Brahma, who had been silent, finally spoke, his voice grave. Brahma, I do not know. But whatever is happening, it is beyond even our comprehension. A murmur spread through the chamber. The greatest minds and powers of the Hindu pantheon, beings who had existed for eons, who had shaped the very fate of the world, were admitting that they had no idea what was occurring. Indra's hands clenched into fists. Indra, this is unacceptable. If we don't understand it, how the hell are we supposed to fight it? Shiva's gaze darkened. Shiva, who said we could fight it? The silence that followed was deafening. Across the world, in another realm, the Greek pantheon had gathered in a similar state of unrest. Zeus stood at the head of the council, his electric blue eyes crackling with barely restrained power. His throne room, normally a place of opulence and grandeur, now felt stifling, as if the air itself was resisting his presence. Explain, he commanded, his voice shaking the very walls. Apollo, his golden aura flickering chaotically, swallowed. Apollo, we don't know. Every prophecy, every vision of the future has gone blank. A gasp rippled through the gods. Even the fates, the very weavers of destiny, stood among them, their expressions grim. Clotho, this is not something that should be possible, Clotho whispered, her fingers gripping the threads of fate as if trying to hold on to something slipping away. Athena, her sharp mind already piecing together fragments of information, spoke. Athena, reality itself is rejecting something. Or someone. Hades, leaning back in his throne of obsidian, exhaled deeply. Hades, the underworld is in chaos. Souls that were meant to pass on are lingering. It is as if the laws governing life and death themselves are hesitating. Zeus' grip tightened on his throne. Zeus, and none of you have an answer? No one responded. For the first time in Olympus' long history, the gods were completely blind. In Takamigara, the Shinto gods convened in a tense gathering. Amaterasu, the radiant sun goddess, kept her composure, but the flickering light around her betrayed her unease. Susanoo crossed his arms, his normally brash attitude subdued. Susanoo, this isn't normal. Tsukuyomi, god of the moon, nodded. Tsukuyomi, something is disturbing the fundamental balance of our world. Amaterasu's golden eyes swept across the room. Amaterasu, do we know the source? A moment of silence. Then, finally, Tamamonome spoke. Tami, no. And that is what frightens me the most. The weight of those words settled heavily in the room. Deep in the underworld, the leaders of the devils gathered. Sirzechs Lucifer, normally calm and calculating, felt a cold sweat forming at the back of his neck. Ajuka Beelzebub, his genius intellect working at full capacity, stared at the calculations before him, his fingers twitching in frustration. Ajuka, none of this makes sense. The equations that define reality, they are shifting, changing into something new. Seraphal Leviathan, usually playful, was dead silent. Falbium Asmodeus frowned. Falbium, if the very laws of our world are changing, then what does that mean for us? Sirzechs exhaled. Sirzechs, it means we are no longer in control. The realization struck the room like a hammer. In the human world, various exorcist organizations scrambled to make sense of what was happening. The Vatican, Grigori, and even independent sacred gear researchers found themselves staring at anomalies that defied all understanding. Azazel, the Governor General of Grigori, rubbed his temples, looking at the endless streams of data flashing before him. Azazel, this is beyond insane. Shemhazai frowned. Shemhazai, Governor, what do we do? Azazel let out a bitter chuckle. Azazel, for the first time in my life I don't know. And among the Dragon Kings, Tannen stared into the sky, his draconic senses screaming at him. Tannen, this is something beyond dragons, beyond gods. His claws dug into the earth. What in the name of the abyss has been born? Cracks spread along the surface of the massive cocoon, glowing fissures forming like lightning streaks across its structure. The sheer pressure emanating from within made the very air tremble. It was as if the world itself held its breath, anticipating what was about to emerge. Then, with a final shattering sound, the cocoon exploded into countless fragments of light, dissolving into the void. Issei stood at the center of it all, his new form unveiled to the watching dragon gods. His skin gleamed like ethereal porcelain, impossibly smooth yet brimming with an inner radiance that defied description. The unruly brown hair he once had was gone, replaced by strands of purest silk, cascading down his head in a clean, refined style. But it was his eyes that drew the most attention. They were golden, not just a simple shade of gold, but a depthless, radiant hue that shimmered like liquid sunlight. They were hypnotic, beautiful beyond words, yet held an intensity that made even gods hesitate. Great Red's eyes narrowed, her usual arrogance giving way to something dangerously close to wariness. Great Red, this power. This isn't infinity. Neither is a dream. Her voice, usually steady, wavered slightly. She clenched her fists. Great Red, Issei Hayadu, what have you become? Issei exhaled slowly, his chest rising and falling as if he were relearning how to breathe. The moment he tried to take a step, his legs gave out, and he collapsed onto his knees. His body felt strange, foreign, yet intimately familiar. He could feel power coursing through every fiber of his being, but it was unlike anything he had ever known. It didn't burn like fire. It didn't surge like a dragon's wrath. It simply was. Before he could even process his own confusion, a small form rushed toward him. Slender arms wrapped around him tightly, pressing into his chest. He stiffened at the touch, his newly awakened senses overwhelming him, but then he heard the voice. A voice he had not heard in what felt like an eternity. Ophis, Issei. Issei, it's me. Ophis. His mind reeled, fragments of memories suddenly resurfacing. A child's laughter. A girl's quiet company. Days spent together, playing, talking, existing in a world where they only had each other. His breath hitched. Ophis, Ophis. I can't believe you. Ophis trembled against him. I know. Her voice cracked, something raw and unspoken filling the space between them. Ophis, I'm sorry for abandoning you. For the first time in all the time she had existed, Ophis, the infinite dragon god, shed tears. Issei wrapped his arms around her, pulling her closer. His grip was tight, desperate, as if afraid she would disappear the moment he let go. The warmth of her presence grounded him, a familiar anchor in a storm of chaos. But the moment was short-lived. Great Red, Ophis, get back. I need to talk to him. Great Red's voice cut through the fragile silence. Ophis hesitated but ultimately loosened her hold. Issei felt the loss of her warmth immediately, but he turned his gaze towards Great Red, whose expression was unreadable. Issei felt the loss of her warmth immediately, but he turned his gaze towards Great Red, whose expression was unreadable. I forgot to add this pic. It's my own take on Great Red's human form. She exhaled sharply, crossing her arms. Great Red, look, brat, or should I say, Issei Hayadu, do you even realize what you've done? Issei shook his head, his golden eyes filled with uncertainty. Issei, I don't even know how I'm alive. And this energy, this feeling, it's like my body isn't mine, but at the same time, it is. Great Red's pressed into a thin line before she sighed. Great Red, I'll explain. But listen closely, because this isn't something you can just shrug off. She paused, gathering her thoughts before continuing. Great Red, when you underwent the dragon godification process, something unexpected happened. Normally, if a being tries to absorb the power of a dragon god, one of two things happen. They either explode because their body can't handle it, or they become a dragon god themselves. But even then, it's never perfect or an imperfect dragon god. You shouldn't have been an exception. You should have either perished or become another sub-dragon god of infinity, or dreams. But you did neither. Instead, you merged the two. Issei furrowed his brows. Issei merged them? Great Red nodded, her golden eyes gleaming. Great Red, yes. Infinity and dreams are two of the most powerful concepts in existence. One represents boundlessness, the other the power of creation and possibility. But you, somehow, you didn't just take in both. You combined them into something new. Issei's hands curled into fists. His mind was still struggling to comprehend what he was hearing. The weight of her words pressed down on him, making his breath feel heavy. He whispered under his breath, barely audible. To your eternity. Great Red blinked. What? Issei lifted his gaze, his golden eyes reflecting a light beyond comprehension. Issei, I don't know why, but that's the word that came into my mind when I woke up. Eternity. Ophis, still kneeling beside him, didn't let go of his hand. Great Red exhaled, shaking her head. Great Red, now I understand. Issei looked at her questioningly. Issei, understand what? She gazed at him, something like reluctant awe in her expression. Great Red, how the combination of infinity and dreams led to the birth of something beyond both. Eternity. Issei swallowed. Great Red crossed her arms. Great Red, infinity is limitless. It exists without end. It is absolute, unchanging, and defies any notion of time or space. It simply is. Dreams, on the other hand, are ever-changing. They are the source of creation, the endless possibilities that shape reality. They are fluid, adaptable, two forces that should never merge because they contradict each other. She gestured toward him. Great Red, yet you did. You took the concept of endless existence and combined it with boundless change. The result? A power that embodies both but is either. Eternity, the perfect balance of absolute existence and infinite possibilities. Unlike Ophis, who embodies unchanging infinity, or me, who embodies chaotic dreams, you are something that transcends both. Issei was silent. It made sense in a way he couldn't explain, as though some deeper instinct within him already understood before his mind did. He could feel it, the stability of infinity, the adaptability of dreams, intertwining in perfect harmony within him. It was neither destructive nor chaotic. It simply existed, beyond limitation, beyond restriction. He looked down at his own hands, flexing his fingers. Issei, what am I now? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Great Red smirked, though there was something strained in it. Great Red, you, Issei Hayabu, are now the embodiment of eternity itself. Ophis tightened her grip on his hand. Ophis, you are still you. Issei let out a slow breath. For the first time since awakening, he finally began to understand. This power, this existence, it was his, and it was just the beginning. Issei clenched his hand into a fist, feeling the unfamiliar yet oddly natural sensation of his own body. He could feel something pulsing within him, a power that was neither foreign nor entirely his own. His breathing was steady, but his mind raced. He had just awakened, and yet everything felt different. Great Red let out a heavy sigh, placing her hands on her hips as she tilted her head, looking at him with a mix of exasperation and curiosity. Stand up, kid. Issei hesitated before pushing himself up, his body moving fluidly despite the overwhelming energy coursing through him. He had barely stood up when he noticed Great Red's gaze flicker downward. Following her eyes, he realized his situation. His entire body was exposed. Heat rushed to his face, and he stumbled back slightly, arms instinctively moving to cover himself. Great Red snorted, clearly amused. With a snap of her fingers, a set of clothes materialized in the air before being tossed toward him. Great Red, here. Put these on before you die of embarrassment. Issei caught them and quickly dressed himself. The clothes fit perfectly, adjusting to his movements like a second skin. Once he was done, he let out a relieved sigh. Thanks. Great Red simply nodded before turning her gaze to Ophis, who still had not let go of his arm. The infinite dragon god clung to him with quiet determination, her expression unreadable yet undeniably possessive. Great Red, you're a dragon god now. Great Red muttered, rubbing her temple as if the reality of the situation was only now sinking in. Great Red, the dragon god of eternity, to be exact. She exhaled, looking straight at him. Great Red, you know, kid, this is unprecedented. I expected you to become a sub-dragon god, sure, but I never thought you'd bring forth an entirely new concept into existence. Issei sat down, running a hand through his newly styled hair, still trying to process it all. Ophis tilted her head, then asked the one question that had been on both their minds. Ophis, then, what are the abilities of eternity? Great Red, from what I can theorize. Great Red began, tapping a finger against her arm. Great Red, eternity isn't just an amalgamation of infinity and dreams. It's something entirely new, and that means its abilities won't just be a combination of ours, they'll be unique. Ophis nodded slightly. She was just as curious. Ophis, then how powerful is he? Compared to us? Great Red sighed again, looking at Issei as if she were examining a puzzle with missing pieces. Great Red, power is relative, but if we're speaking in terms of pure existence, he's already on par with us. However, she paused, her eyes narrowing slightly. Great Red, unlike infinity, which is unchanging and absolute, or dreams, which is ever-shifting and unpredictable, eternity adapts. That makes him more dangerous than either of us. Issei frowned. Adapts? Great Red nodded. Great Red, infinity cannot be altered. It is constant. No matter what happens, Ophis will always be what she is. Dreams, on the other hand, shift with imagination, meaning I can change my own reality as I see fit. But you? You are the balance between the two. Your existence neither remains fixed nor fluctuates without control. It evolves. Ophis tilted her head. Meaning? Great Red leaned forward slightly, her expression serious. Great Red, meaning that if someone were to attack Issei with an ability meant to erase him, his very concept would adjust to counteract it. If someone tried to bind him in time, his existence would rewrite itself to be unaffected. If someone attempted to overpower him, his power would grow to match and surpass it. His very nature is to endure, to persist, to remain. Unlike infinity, which exists without change, and dreams, which reshape reality, eternity simply continues. Issei swallowed. Issei, so I can't be destroyed? Great Red scoffed. Great Red, destroyed? No. That's off the table. At most, you could be sealed, but even that is questionable. Your existence itself would naturally resist any form of limitation. She glanced at Ophis. Great Red, you should already feel it, shouldn't you? Ophis nodded slightly, her grip on Issei tightening. Ophis, he is stable. More than us. Great Red smirked. Great Red, exactly. Ophis, you are the embodiment of infinity, but even your existence is somewhat fragile. If your power is taken from you, you become vulnerable. As for me, dreams are volatile, constantly shifting, unpredictable. But Issei? His power will never waver, never diminish, never be taken away. It simply is. That makes him more terrifying than either of us. Issei remained quiet, digesting the information. The more he thought about it, the more he could feel it. It was a strange sensation, like something inside him was constantly adjusting, constantly perfecting itself. Every breath he took felt effortless, his senses sharper, his awareness expanding. He was neither unmovable like Ophis nor chaotic like Great Red. He was something that lasted. Great Red tapped her chin, as if thinking of more ways he could apply his power. Great Red, as for abilities, well, the possibilities are endless. You could manipulate the concept of time, not by controlling it like a temporal god, but by making yourself unaffected by its passage. You could create barriers that will never break, no matter how strong the opponent. Your regeneration should be absolute, beyond even Ophis. You might even be able to impose your concept onto others, forcing something or someone to remain in a state of existence you choose. Ophis' eyes darkened slightly, intrigued. Ophis, forcing something to be eternal? Great Red grinned. Great Red, exactly. Say you fight someone who regenerates infinitely. You could override that and make them permanently dead. If something is decaying, you could make it so that it never deteriorates. If something is unstable, you could make it constant. Your power is the absolute balance between permanence and evolution. Issei looked down at his hands again. Issei, so I can control the very concept of existence? Great Red shrugged. Great Red, more or less. But it'll take time before you can fully harness that power. She smirked, tilting her head. Great Red, still, you've already surpassed us in potential. If you ever reach the peak of your abilities, not even we would be able to stop you. Issei exhaled slowly. The weight of what he had become was finally settling in. He had started as a human, then became a devil, then a dragon god. But now he was something entirely new. Something beyond comprehension. Ophis moved closer, resting her forehead against his shoulder. You are still Issei, she murmured. Issei blinked before smiling softly. Issei, yeah. I guess I am. Great Red watched the interaction before shaking her head with a smirk. Great Red, well, brat, welcome to your new reality. Let's see what eternity has in store for you. The air around Issei trembled as the boosted gear materialized on his arm, the familiar crimson gauntlet gleaming under an unseen light. The power within it pulsed, alive and heavy yet different. He could feel it. Something had changed. A deep, ancient voice rumbled within his mind. Partner, Issei's breath itched. Issei, Drake, you're okay? The dragon's voice was calm but carried an undertone of something unreadable. Drake, more than okay. But we need to talk. Before Issei could respond, the gauntlet flickered, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Drake manifested before him. The massive red dragon stood tall, his emerald eyes focused solely on Issei. Ophis and Great Red remained silent, watching. Issei swallowed. Issei, Drake, what happened? The dragon exhaled, his breath causing space itself to distort slightly. Drake, your fight with Vali. That was the catalyst. You did something, partner. Something no past wielder has ever done. Issei frowned. Issei, you mean evolving the boosted gear? Drake nodded. Drake, yes. You did not just evolve it, you redefined it. The power you poured into it, the will you exerted, it was beyond anything I have ever seen. And the cost. His voice grew solemn. Drake, the past wielders. They're gone. No worries, Issei, at least you did better than a certain avatar. Issei's heart clenched. He had felt it during the fight. The surge of power, the overwhelming force that allowed him to push past Vali, to reach a state beyond what should have been possible. But he had also felt something fading, something slipping away. You mean? Drake's eyes softened. Drake, they have finally found rest. Their souls, which had been lingering within the boosted gear for centuries, are no longer trapped. They gave their final strength to you, and in doing so, they were freed. Issei clenched his fists. Issei, I didn't mean to. Drake chuckled, though there was no humor in it. Drake, they wanted this, partner. You don't understand how long they've suffered, how long they've waited for release. You gave them that. Issei closed his eyes, taking a slow breath. He had never truly thought about the past wielders, about what it meant for their spirits to be bound to the sacred gear. But now they were gone. And the boosted gear, his eyes snapped open. Issei, wait. If they're gone, then what about the boosted gear itself? What about you? Drake's expression grew unreadable. Drake, that's the second thing we need to talk about. The gauntlet on Issei's arm pulsed again, but this time, it felt different. Drake's wings stretched slightly before he spoke again. Drake, you are no longer a mere devil, partner. You are now the dragon god of eternity. And because of that, the boosted gear is no longer bound by the sacred gear system created by the biblical god. Issei's eyes widened. What? Ophis finally spoke. Ophis, he is correct. Your transformation has severed the boosted gear from the system. Great Red crossed her arms. Great Red, that means it is fully yours now. No limitations. No restrictions. No ties to the system that once controlled it. Issei looked down at the gauntlet again, trying to process what that meant. Issei, so, the boosted gear is just part of me now? Drake nodded. Drake, it has always been yours, but now, it is something beyond a mere sacred gear. It is no longer a tool created by a god. It is now something only you possess. Something unique. Issei exhaled, his mind racing. Issei, then, does that mean I can still use its abilities? Drake smirked. Drake, of course. But its potential is no longer limited to what it was before. You are not just a host anymore. You are its god now. Issei felt a chill run down his spine. The idea of the boosted gear no longer being constrained by the original system meant. Great Red sighed. Great Red, it means you can shape its power however you see fit. Its base ability, doubling power, is still there, but now, you could evolve it further, redefine its very existence, just like you did before. Ophis tilted her head slightly. Ophis, boosted gear is no longer just a tool. It is an extension of you. Issei ran a hand through his hair. Issei, this is insane. Drake chuckled again. Drake, that's putting it lightly, partner. But let me warn you, because the boosted gear is now tied to you alone, its power will now come entirely from your own energy and existence. You won't have the past wielders to lend you strength anymore. Issei nodded slowly. That meant no more shortcuts, no more borrowed power. But at the same time, Ophis leaned closer. Ophis. But he is the dragon god of eternity. His power is limitless. That means boosted gear has also transcended its former limits. Drake grinned. Drake, exactly? If you train it properly, partner, it could become something greater than even what it once was. It could be a weapon that surpasses anything ever created. Issei let out a long breath, staring at his gauntlet. This power, it was truly his now. No lingering souls, no external constraints. Just him and Drake. A slow smile formed on his. Issei, then I guess we've got some work to do, huh? Drake laughed. Drake, that's the spirit, partner. Great Red smirked. Great Red, well, at least you're handling it better than I thought you would. Ophis didn't say anything, simply holding onto Issei's arm a little tighter. Issei stood up, feeling a newfound sense of purpose. He wasn't just some pawn of fate anymore. He wasn't just a host to a dragon's soul. He wasn't just a human wielding something beyond him. He was the dragon god of eternity, and the boosted gear was now his in every sense of the word. It had been a few months since everything changed. Since he fought Vali. Since he died and was reborn. Since he became something that should have never existed. A dragon god. The dragon god of eternity. Now, he walked through Ko with Ophis beside him, her small hand resting comfortably in his. She had become something constant in his life. Ever since she pulled him into the dimensional gap, since she stayed by his side as he learned to control his power, she never left him. And strangely, he didn't mind. Ophis, are you going to your parents' place? Ophis asked, her voice as monotonous as always, yet with a small, nearly imperceptible hint of curiosity. Issei barely reacted, his golden eyes scanning the familiar streets. Issei, after what they did? Of course not. They're not really my real parents. Ophis tilted her head slightly at his answer. He shrugged, brushing off the topic as if it didn't bother him. Maybe it didn't anymore. Ophis, so where to? She asked. Issei, I have a place. Just follow me, he said. Then, after a moment, he glanced at her. Issei, you want something to eat? Ophis, I do not need to eat, she replied simply, before pausing. Ophis, but if you want, Issei smirked. Issei, what about a bakery? He led her to a bakery, buying her a selection of sweets. She took a bite, and for the first time in a long while, her expression changed, her eyes widening slightly, her curling into something resembling happiness. Delicious, she muttered, her voice barely above a whisper, but the emotion behind it was unmistakable. Issei chuckled, watching her enjoy the treat. He leaned against the counter, but his relaxed moment was soon interrupted. Who's that? He's so handsome. Look at his eyes. They're unreal. Is that his girlfriend? No way. If he's into Lolis, that's kind of a turnoff, but damn, he's gorgeous. He blinked, hearing the murmurs and feeling the eyes on him. He turned slightly confused. Issei, why are they looking at me like that? Ophis, who had been happily eating, suddenly shot a cold glare toward the girls, her presence darkening instantly. The moment their eyes met hers, they flinched, some quickly looking away in fear. One, however, muttered just loud enough to be heard. He's probably a Lilicon or something. Ophis's eyes narrowed dangerously, but before she could do anything, she simply stated, Ophis, Issei is handsome. Issei froze for a second before feeling heat creep up his face. Thanks. He caught his reflection in the bakery window and had to pause for a moment. He had changed. His brown hair was no longer just brown, it had a strange shimmer to it, a depth of color that looked unreal, like flowing silk under the sunlight. His skin, once normal, was now flawless, smooth, and almost ethereal, as if he wasn't a being of this world anymore. And his golden eyes were piercing, vibrant, glowing with a light that had never been there before. He looked beautiful. Almost too beautiful. Shaking his head, he turned back to Ophis. Issei, come on, let's go. They eventually reached his home. It looked normal, just a simple house, nothing extravagant, nothing that stood out. It wasn't a mansion, it wasn't overly fancy, but it was a home. And it was his. Ophis, something happened with your parents. Ophis spoke suddenly. Issei sighed, running a hand through his hair. Issei, yeah, I had an argument with Rias when I didn't call her by her real name, especially since I was still traumatized by what Rainier did. Everyone quickly turned against me, insulting me, forgetting everything I did for them. She said she should have left me to die or allowed Rainier to finish the job. And my parents, he let out a bitter chuckle. Issei, they preferred Rias. Or Asia. Or the others. To them, I was nothing but a pervert, and they seemed like a better replacement. He sighed. Issei, I ran away that day, which led to my fight with Vali, and you rescued me after the battle. Ophis was silent, but the air around her shifted. She was angry, he continued. Issei, as for this house, during my days as a devil, I made a contract with a grandma. She lost her entire family in an airplane crash. They were coming to see her for the holidays, and never made it. I was basically her grandson. I made sure to take care of her until the day she passed. She left me her home and everything. I was a stranger at first, but she was like my real family. Ophis didn't say anything at first. Then, suddenly, she moved forward, wrapping her arms around him in a soft, warm embrace. He stiffened slightly, but then relaxed, letting himself sink into the unexpected comfort. She had changed. Over the months, training in the dimensional gap, she had started to show more emotions. Small things, subtle expressions, tiny actions, but they were there. And this, it was different from anything before. They entered the house, and Issei let out a tired sigh, lying down on the bed. Issei, it's been a long time since I've rested on a bed. Before he knew it, Ophis had crawled on top of his chest. Then, without warning, she leaned down and at him. His eyes widened, and he quickly pushed her away slightly, separating from the. Ophis stared at him. Her expression, her voice looked and sounded genuinely sad. Issei, and no, it's not that, he quickly clarified. Issei, it's just you look like a child. It just doesn't feel right, that's all. Ophis blinked. Ophis, oh. My form is making you uncomfortable. Issei nodded awkwardly. Issei, just when doing romantic things. Sorry, she tilted her head, then slowly nodded. Ophis. Yes. I look like a child. I understand. Then, a soft glow of purple surrounded her. The light twisted and pulsed, wrapping around her form, reshaping it. And then, after a few seconds, it faded. Issei's breath hitched. She was now the same height as him, her body fully matured. Her long black hair cascaded down her back, her silver-purple eyes shined beautifully, and her curves her chest was. He used every ounce of willpower not to get a nosebleed. Ophis looked down at herself, then at him. Ophis, do you like my new form? Issei swallowed thickly. Why, yeah. She leaned forward again, pressing her now much larger, much softer chest against him. Then, this time, when she had him, he didn't push her away. That was deep, slow, and lingering, and when they finally pulled away, Ophis rested her head against his chest, her arms wrapped around him. Issei let out a slow breath, lying back down, his arms instinctively holding onto her. For the first time in a long time, he felt at peace. It was finally morning, and Issei woke up, stretching his arms as he let out a deep yawn. His body, now far more powerful than it had ever been, felt no fatigue, no stiffness, yet the act of waking up still remained ingrained in him. As he blinked away the remnants of sleep, he felt a light pressure on his chest. Looking down, he was met with a pair of deep, silver-purple eyes staring back at him. Issei, you didn't sleep? Issei asked, tilting his head slightly. Ophis shook her head, her long black hair falling over his chest. Ophis, I don't need to sleep, she replied, a small, rare smile appearing on her face. Ophis, how was your night? Issei let out another yawn before returning her smile. It was fine. He stretched again, feeling the warmth of her body still pressed against him. Ophis remained still, simply observing him with the same unreadable expression she always wore. Her emotions were much clearer now than when they had first met, but she still had a way of keeping her thoughts to herself. Issei, I'll go make breakfast for both of us, Issei said as he got up, rubbing his eyes. Ophis merely hummed in response. Thanks to his newfound nature as a dragon god, things like hunger, tiredness, and fatigue no longer affected him, yet the habits of his human and devil life were hard to discard. Eating, cooking, and enjoying food were things that felt natural to him, even if he no longer required sustenance. He didn't want to lose those parts of himself. Ophis silently followed him into the kitchen, watching as he started gathering ingredients. She tilted her head slightly. Ophis, what are you making? She asked curiously. Pancakes, Issei replied, cracking an egg into the bowl. Ophis, you don't need to eat, Ophis stated, stepping closer. Ophis, you are like me now, Issei chuckled. Issei, well, that's gonna take some getting used to. I was human, and then a devil. I can't just stop eating like Ida nothing. Ophis continued watching him with keen interest. Ophis, Thena makes some for me too, she said, puffing her cheeks slightly. Issei couldn't help but smile. Of course. The two of them sat at the dining table soon after, with stacks of pancakes placed neatly before them. Issei took a bite, but the moment the food entered his body, it was instantly absorbed, leaving him with a strange, almost empty feeling. He frowned slightly. It was weird, but something he could probably get used to. Ophis, on the other hand, simply stared at him. Ophis, is something wrong? Issei asked, raising a brow. Ophis blinked, her expression serious. Ophis, I want you to feed me. Ophis, noticing his reaction, tilted her head. Ophis, Issei, are you okay? Your face is red. Issei sighed, trying his best to calm down. I am fine, he muttered. He hesitantly picked up a piece of pancake with his fork and brought it to her. She opened her mouth obediently, taking a bite. A satisfied expression appeared on her face as she chewed. Ophis, so what now? Ophis asked, her voice as soft and emotionless as ever. Issei blinked. Issei, as I know how? Ophis, what do you plan to do with all this power? She asked, looking at him directly. Ophis, you are a dragon god now. Issei fell silent, contemplating. After a moment he spoke. Issei, I think I'll just go back to school. Live a regular life. Ophis narrowed her eyes. Ophis, you have the power of a dragon god. You are the Red Dragon Emperor. You can never have a normal life. Issei sighed, feeding her another piece of pancake. Issei, I plan on keeping a low profile. I'm out of the stress of everything over these past months alone. He trailed off, his voice heavy. Ophis watched him, her gaze softening just a little. Ophis, well, no matter what you do, I will be by your side. Before Issei could react, she suddenly leaned forward and wrapped her arms around him, pressing his face deep into her chest. His face turned an even darker shade of red. "Ophis," he stuttered, his voice muffled. She simply tightened her embrace. "Ophis, I will always be with you, Issei." Issei sighed into her, a small smile forming on his despite his embarrassment. "Yeah." Issei sat there for a moment, enjoying the warmth of Ophis still pressed against him. A thought crossed his mind, and he decided to ask, "Issei, what about you?" Ophis tilted her head to the side, her expression as unreadable as always, but her curiosity was evident. "Ophis, what do you mean?" "Issei, the Cow's Brigade," Issei said, his voice firm. Ophis sighed softly, as if she had expected the question but wasn't particularly eager to answer. "Ophis, I created the Cow's Brigade to help me defeat my older sister so I could reclaim the dimensional gap and spend the rest of eternity with you. Not for world domination." Issei rubbed his temples, trying to process everything. "Issei, I was circumflex, don't understand. What about Rise of Him? The hero faction? And all the crazy stuff they pulled?" Ophis shook her head, her long black hair flowing slightly with the movement. "Ophis, I did recruit them, but that doesn't mean I control them." Issei blinked, confusion evident on his face. Wait, what? Ophis looked him directly in the eyes, her expression unreadable. "Ophis, I may have created the Cow's Brigade, but that doesn't make me their leader. I even sensed that they might betray me one day." Issei let out a snort. He found it hard to believe that anyone in the Cow's Brigade could actually hurt her. "Issei, you are the infinite Ouroboros dragon god. What could they even do to you? And besides, you don't need the dimensional gap anymore." He leaned forward and gently pecked her cheek. Her pale skin turned a faint shade of pink, a rare sight that made him smile. "Issei, you have me," he said softly. Ophis pressed her face against his chest, closing her eyes. "Ophis, I've lost complete interest in regaining my old home," she murmured. "Ophis, because I have a new one." She lifted her head and gently at his. Issei smiled as she pulled away. "Issei, thanks, Ophis. But I have to go to school. I have some things to deal with personally." Ophis's expression didn't change, but there was a slight shift in her eyes. "Ophis, then I'll come with you." Issei immediately shook his head. No. Her brows furrowed. "Issei, I think you left the three factions on a bad note," he said, choosing his words carefully. "Issei, I'll handle it myself. If you show up, it might make things worse." He saw something flash in her eyes, but she didn't argue. Instead, she gave a small nod. Okay then. After breakfast, Issei went to his room and grabbed his old school uniform. The moment he put it on, he realized something was off. Damn, he muttered. The fabric was stretched tight around his arms and chest. He moved slightly, and with a small tear, the sleeve ripped apart. "Issei, well, nothing magic can't fix," he said with a chuckle. With a wave of his hand, his clothes shimmered, turning into a golden glow before reshaping into a perfectly fitted school uniform. He adjusted the sleeves and examined himself in the mirror. "Issei, how do I look?" he asked. Before he could react, Ophis appeared in front of him, adjusting his collar. Her fingers were soft and delicate as she made sure everything was in place. "Ophis, you look handsome," she said simply. She leaned forward and at his cheek, lingering just long enough to make his face heat up. "Ophis, have a nice day at school," she added. Issei smiled, picking up his bag. Thanks. He waved at her before stepping out of the house. Ophis stood there for a moment before tilting her head. "Ophis, what should I do now?" A thought crossed her mind, and a small smile tugged at her. "Ophis, maybe I should watch anime." Meanwhile, Issei walked towards Ko Academy, his hands tucked into his pockets. The morning air was crisp, and the sun was shining brightly. It was the same path he had taken so many times before, yet everything felt different now. Students were already making their way towards the school, chatting and laughing like nothing had changed. Issei sighed. To them, he was just a student returning after an absence, but to him, this was the start of something new. Thanks for watching this video. You really enjoy this video. Like, subscribe, and comment down below, and turn on that bell notification. Don't forget to support and follow Dustinsage for writing that awesome fanfic, and also make sure to comment on this story link in the description. See you in the next video. Goodbye.